Man, I almost got so busted this morning. It was it was so close. So I'm driving in and there was a car coming down 100. I'm making my way to the American Experiment offices and of course the studio this morning over here in Minnetonka. And there was a car that was with me like almost the entirety of the way. And we're kind of matching speed back and forth. And there were some moments when he was riding up behind me super close, and I just kind of moved over a different lane. I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to be better as I'm driving, right? Not getting upset when people are tailgating, especially at 4:30 in the morning. It makes no logical sense whatsoever. You have a whole open road. Why do you got to be right behind me? Anyway, we're making the transition to 62 West, and the guy's in front of me. So he had passed me and he got in front of me, and he was going the same direction I was. And for some reason, when he got on 62, like he just slowed dramatically, just way down. I was like, what in the world? Right. So I just, I took Monty and I got in the left hand lane and I zoomed right past him. Right. And there's a moment like right after you make that transition, the freeway kind of banks and turns. So it's a bit of a blind spot. There's kind of a little tiny hill there. Right. And I kept picking up speed after I passed this guy. And I just come right up around the bend. And the moment that I do, I can see the glare off to the side of the road of a police SUV, right? Got all his lights off. I'm like, gosh darn it. So I did this. I didn't slam on the brakes. I just laid on him just enough to back off and slow down and got, like, whoa, horsey kind of thing. So as I'm passing him, I can see his brake lights tick on. I'm like, gosh darn it. Go, well, you know what? I've had the car for almost a year. I did my road trip at the beginning of June, some 5,000 miles, didn't get pulled over once. It's bound to happen, right? To the point. I thought I was so busted that I actually went so far as to pull the wallet out of my pants and set it on the console. So I'm going to need it. I'm going to need it. And in my mind, I'm going, well, maybe he'll ask me where I'm going. Where are you going? Oh, I'm going to Center of the American Experiment. I host a weekly show. Love police officers, by the way. So I kind of watched in my rearview mirror, and he didn't end up catching up. Man, I lucked out. It wasn't so much like the ticket would have sucked. I'm not gonna lie, the ticket that would have been awful, right? And I haven't had a ticket in a long time, so I'm like not necessarily worried about rising insurance rates and all that. But then to have the conversation with Melinda, that would be the worst part whatsoever. See, and I can tell this story right now because she doesn't wake up until 6:30, so she's not going to hear it, and she doesn't go and get caught up on the show until a lot later. Welcome to Tuesday. It has a feel. It is the John Justice Show presented by American Experiment. Thank you to all the early risers this morning for joining us. I greatly appreciate it. We have David Gartenstein-Ross, your AI analyst and expert. He'll be coming up at 6:30 this morning. Get your artificial intelligence related questions in right now to either john.justice@americanexperiment.org. And that's JON, by the way. If you're watching online, you can see it on the sign. So we have a sign. We have a sign that way people can see it's JON. That way people know. They ain't get confused, Also, leave us a blast. We already have comments that are rolling in this morning. 612-584-4565. And I'll sneak one of these in that's kind of off topic since I haven't gotten into any material as of late. But speaking of content on the show this morning, we have an update on the vandals in Blaine. Apparently, it was not politically motivated. It legitimately was cowardly juveniles, as I was describing yesterday. And I don't know if I buy into that. We talked about this at length yesterday, where Leslie Larson, the council member and also running for the House, she had her sedan was covered in photocopies of middle fingers scotch taped all over the vehicle. And it turns out, according to police, it wasn't politically motivated. And this was a bunch of juveniles. But I question all of that. So hopefully Leslie will kind of provide some clarity on that. I just would be curious, considering this is my neck of the woods because I live in Blaine and she's my, my council member. So we'll give you an update on that coming up after 7 o'clock. Also, new fraud stories and an update on the Anoka assistant attorney and the sex trafficking ring. There was a press conference yesterday regarding this with further details of these charges. And on top of that, I had to do a little digging to make sure these were two separate stories. But there's another story. This one from Bill Glahn, policy fellow here at American Experiment, talking about another layer of fraud involving a sex scandal and services not provided, the state being billed for Medicaid dollars, again, for services not provided. So now we've just reached a level where sex is fraudulent here in the state of Minnesota, and I did not have that on my bingo card this morning. Later on in the show, we will have John Phelan, economist and policy fellow, also here at American Experiment. Amy Klobuchar and the local media has been quick to go and push this out to everybody. She's put forward what she says is this plan to reduce healthcare costs. John Phelan, in a piece today, argues that she's not even really capable of doing this anymore, or at least she wouldn't be in the position of governor if she were to win. So he'll be joining us on the American Experiment Studio sofas coming up at 8:30. And of course, throughout the show this morning, we'll get to your comments on the Blaster line, 612-584-4565. And as I mentioned, you can email john.justice@americanexperiment.org. You can watch at MN Think Tank on X, also on Facebook and on YouTube, on X at American Experiment as well, and my personal Facebook and YouTube pages. You can watch there too. So speaking of Blast, let's go ahead and get to some thoughts this morning from friend of the show, Brandon.
John, Brandon, Cottage Grove. Let's seriously talk about this Lioness show. It has just got exponentially better and better and better since season 1, episode 1 to where we are at now. What a fantastic show. Sidebar, when I was deployed to Iraq, I worked with the original Lionesses. I won't get into it right now, but I will send you an email explaining what they did while we were over there in 2006. Have a great Tuesday show.
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, my wife and I enjoy Lioness quite a bit on Paramount. It's written and I believe directed by Taylor Sheridan, who also stars on occasion in the show. I don't recommend it because, again, I don't typically go and recommend shows because everybody has different tastes, and a lot of these shows have explicit content, and so you have to go and decide for yourself if there's something that I think is sort of universal for everybody to love, like a Project Hail Mary. I'll do a recommendation, but no, I'm very much enjoying this season of Lioness. I tend to agree with you. I think it's one of the best seasons of Lioness. Taylor Sheridan sort of dives into a bit of the wokeness, political correctness, but he surrounds it with such quality storytelling that you're able to sort of shove it aside. But again, because of that, I don't do a recommendation on that show because of some of the more explicit content. And it's interesting to me because I've actually seen some conservative pushback on Lioness recently. Sort of going the girl boss route. And I was talking with Melinda about this last night, and she and I both completely disagree. I think a lot of times when people go looking for that, they just end up finding it, where if they didn't have that mentality when they were going to watch a show, they could be, they would be more easily entertained and less annoyed by what they think is the injection of woke ideologies. But thank you for the comment, Brandon, and I'm right there with you. So let's go here to kick things off. Again, if you want to get your questions in for David Gartenstein Ross, you can do that now. Talking artificial intelligence. I have a handful of stories that I've grabbed for our discussion today. But one of the things that David and I love to do the most is do a bit of and ask him anything. He's the expert on artificial intelligence, and he loves to be put on. He loves to be put on the spot and to answer your questions. So John.Justice, JON@AmericanExperiment.org, or again, 612-584-4565. So Rosie O'Donnell, for those that weren't aware, she's guest hosting Jimmy Kimmel Live. And this was a part of her opening monologue, and it's just one of these one of these things that Trump derangement syndrome sufferers do that I simply cannot relate to, and I do not understand the mentality.
Thank you. Sit, relax. Oh, boy, it's great to be back. They said you can't come home again, but here I am. And if you thought the president hated Jimmy Kimmel Live when it was hosted by Jimmy Kimmel, buckle up, people, buckle up. Welcome to the show. I am your guest host, Rosie O'Donnell, and if you're wondering...
This desire or this belief that, you know, Donald Trump hates them and he hates Jimmy Kimmel's show and he's really going to hate me. That's just the aspect of Trump derangement syndrome that I cannot relate to. The mentality of an individual who is desperate to have somebody hate them and goes out of their way to make the individual who is their target hate them. I don't get it. I mean, there's been circumstances with people that, you know, I don't like or don't appreciate or have, you know, treated me inappropriately, but never have I thought I want to go out of my way to make them, you know, hate me. I just don't get it. The sidebar to that, by the way, is that she just seemed awkward. I mean, I guess she hasn't hosted in a long, long time, so it's probably an unfair argument to lob at Rosie O'Donnell, but she just seemed a little awkward, a little rusty in terms of her monologue yesterday. Albeit, I didn't watch much more than that because I can't stand Rosie O'Donnell as much as of anybody else. So I just do what normal people do, and I do not consume any of her content. But speaking of President Donald Trump, there was a press conference yesterday, and I have a couple of clips I want to share with you. He announced in the Oval Office that he's giving a personal recommendation for a 16-year-old lifeguard, Ryder Williams, to become a firefighter, which is apparently his dream job. So they're in the Oval Office, and this lifeguard, Ryder Williams, is there, and there's some other young individuals that are there as well. I think it was the brother and the mom and the dad of this particular individual, considering he was 16 years old. So first off, here's a bit of what Trump had to say to this young lifeguard hero, and I play this in comparison to Rosie O'Donnell and the left's Trump derangement syndrome, because everything that I've heard from individuals who have spent time with Donald Trump, they talk about what a genuine quality person and how much he actually cares. That's not to say that he can't be caustic. That's not to say that he hasn't spoken in ways that I don't even appreciate, right? But it is to say that generally speaking, Trump is genuinely a good person. And it's something that the left will never go and give him credit for.
They're going to look up to Ryder. They're going to look up to Nathaniel, the way Nathaniel handled it. He was cool considering the problems I was watching. You were very cool. And they're going to gain respect. I think, very importantly, they're going to gain respect for what these people do, having to do with lifeguards and having to do with safety. This was an unbelievable experience. Anybody watching, it's not my world, but I respect that world. I always had, but never maybe so much as I do now. So I thought you bring, to your profession, to what you do and what you do so well, you brought tremendous grace and experience, really tremendous grace, tremendous a feeling that it's so amazing to see this happen, to see it before your eyes. And I don't think any other, I've seen surfs, I've seen rescues before. I've never seen anything quite like this. It's been a great thing for your profession, and people are going to respect it even more, respect you even more. So I just thought it was really a very worthwhile event to have it at the Oval Office. So congratulations.
So after this brief announcement, President Donald Trump started taking questions from reporters and just ended up ripping this CNN reporter a new one as she was screaming out, trying to get Trump's attention. Here was that exchange.
Mr. President, quiet. You're very disrespectful in front of this young man. Okay? Don't you find her disrespectful? He understands. Quiet. Who are you with?
I'm with CNN.
Fake news. You're fake news. You're loud. You're a loud, boisterous person. You're fake news.
I was
Be
trying to
quiet.
find out if
Be
you had
quiet.
been talking
Be
to
quiet.
Kim Jong-un, if he had asked you
You're a
to
fake
scale back
reporter, and you
all the
report fake
military
news.
exercises.
Go ahead.
Mr. President.
I got to hand it to the reporter in that moment, because she kind of just pushed forward. I imagine that the White House press corps, especially those working for MS Now or NBC or CNN, they've got to be used to the president making comments like that, to where it's probably just white noise to them. But it doesn't mean it's any less entertaining when it ends up happening. Coming up on the show, Minnesota voter rolls staying private after court rejects Trump fishing expedition, according to the judge. Well, yeah, it's a fishing expedition. I mean, when you go to fish, you want to catch fish. I mean, he's using it as a negative, and it's usually used as a negative. I get that. But in reality, that's what Trump is doing. He wants to see what the voter rolls would expose about what's happening here in our Minnesota elections. And to that point, there's a lengthy piece from the Federalist that I'll share with you. California admits it doesn't track non-citizens on voter rolls as the federal law requires. And you can pretty much take the details of what the Federalist investigated in California and apply it here to Minnesota, because California's lack of voter integrity laws pretty much mirrors, or vice versa. Minnesota's election laws mirror California's election laws that make them susceptible to fraud and lack integrity. So I'll give you details on that coming up in just a moment on the show. You know, Melinda and I were out on Friday. We were doing our weekly Costco trip, and made a quick stop into Target. Had to do some ancillary shopping, and it was in that moment as we're walking into the store, and I told her, and this conversation totally happened. I told her, I go, man, ever since I lost the weight that I lost, it is so much easier to go out and do just the daily things that one does. You know, when you're carrying around an extra 25 pounds, it makes a huge difference. I didn't even realize that. I went on this program from NutraWave, and it's made all the difference in my life, all the positive difference in my life. And, you know, as I mentioned, you may not even realize, but you want to be, we want to lose the weight because you want to be healthier. But the impact that it has just on your daily routine is significant. I have way more energy than I ever did before. I can see in the mirror. I feel healthier. I look healthier. And this is a program that requires no pills and no shots. You see a lot of people losing weight through those shots and those pills, but you and I both know when you look at those individuals, you can tell they just don't look healthy. It's completely different when it comes to the NutraWave program. For over 13 years, they've helped thousands of men and women lose the weight. And right now, spots are limited, but you can still get an almost $300 valued Truth Metabolic scan and a red light therapy session just for finding out about the program. It's that simple. All you have to do is call 952-260-1965. That's 952-260-1965. Mention the word strike, and those spots, that are available, if there's one still available, it's yours. You end up getting a free red light therapy session. I've done both of these things. The Truth Metabolic scan is really kind of fun. It lets you know exactly what's going on with your body composition, and you end up setting your goals on the NutraWave program through that. And the red light therapy session assists with weight loss. I've seen it happen firsthand as I went through the same experience that you'll go through as well. So again, no pills, no shots with NutraWave, NutriWave.us. Individual results may vary, but call today at 952-260-1965. That's 952-260-1965 for NutraWave. Call them today.
Think about it. Now that school's back in session, how are Minnesota students doing? Not very well. Minnesota ACT scores fell again last year and are the lowest they've been in 10 years. In fact, fewer than half of Minnesota students can either read or do math at grade level. Think about it. We used to brag about our schools. Now we're losing to states like Mississippi. Visit AmericanExperiment.org for more information. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
And now, here's commentary on the latest issues facing Minnesotans from the hosts, policy fellows, and guests of American Experiment.
Josiah Padley here at American Experiment just found that there are 11 schools in Minnesota that have 0 students doing math at grade level. Now, you might be wondering, is it just because these are, maybe underprivileged schools, they don't have the funding or the resources necessary to support these kids? No is the answer, because their average per pupil spending was $19,600, nearly $20,000 per student, which is also much higher than the state.
Support the John Justice Show. Become an advertiser. Competitive rates for both personal endorsements and standard ads are available. For more details, email john.justice@americanexperiment.org.
There's 3 things to note here on this story. Number 1, these findings came straight from data from the Minnesota Department of Education. Number 2, the 11 schools include traditional public, magnet, and charter schools. And number 3, grade level mathematics proficiency is measured by the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment, the MCAs. I'm sure you've heard us talk about them before on this show, and they are taken by a majority of Minnesota students. Worth noting that almost every school on this list of 11 is in the Twin Cities metro area. 5 of the 11 schools have had 0 students proficient in math for at least 2 years in a row.
Think about it. Black and Hispanic students in Mississippi perform better in reading and math than Black and Hispanic students in Minnesota. And Mississippi spends thousands of dollars less per student than Minnesota. Mississippi spends less money, gets better results, and their achievement gaps are closing, while ours are getting worse. Think about it. It's time for real education reform, so Minnesota can catch up to Mississippi. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
People of all ages are leaving Minnesota for other states.
Yeah, and that pushes back on that narrative that it's just, retirees that are leaving Minnesota because it's too cold here, when what we see are people in every single age category are leaving, even under 26-year-olds, even people in their middle age. It's not just the weather that's driving people out of our state, it's the bad policies.
Think about it. Minnesota has always been a low-crime state. But according to the most recent Bureau of Criminal Apprehension data, we are now above the national average when it comes to Part 1 crimes, a category that includes crimes like murder, assault, rape, and carjackings. Think about it. Minnesota is now a high-crime state. Visit highcrimemn.com to learn more. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
It's the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment. You can watch live at MN Think Tank on X, YouTube, and Facebook at Center of the American Experiment. Listen live at americanexperiment.org and download the free MixLR app, MixLR app. The podcasts are loaded there on the app. It's also where you can listen live at 6 until 9 a.m. And, of course, the podcasts after the show are also uploaded across all the podcast platforms, and the videos are available for a rewatch on those platforms, and Rumble included. I see comments rolling in for David Gartenstein-Ross, our AI analyst and expert, the CEO at Expert Theory. He'll be joining us right around 6:30. A federal judge yesterday dismissed the Trump administration's lawsuit seeking Minnesota's voter rolls, calling it a fishing expedition, because it was, but not in a negative way. The Trump administration wants to get to the bottom of what's happening here in Minnesota, and with what I'm about to detail of what's happening in California, for good reason. The ruling protects voter privacy, as the administration had no basis to demand the unredacted voter information. And yet we have other states that have been more than happy to go and turn over the voter rolls, and there's been no compromising of voters' privacy. The Minnesota Secretary of State, Steve Simon, appeared on Fox 9 all day yesterday, called AG Pam Bondi's request to turn over the voter rolls bizarre and disturbing, because of course he would. What are they trying to hide? I mean, that's the question. The U.S. District Court for the District of Minnesota dismissed the 2025 lawsuit from the Trump administration that sought the state's entire voter registration list. The court found that the federal government had no basis under the Civil Rights Act of 1960 or the Help America Vote Act to demand the voter list, calling the effort a fishing expedition. Well, okay. Fact-finding mission, choose whatever description you want. The court's decision means officials will not have to turn over the unredacted voter information to the federal government. The Trump administration has filed similar lawsuits in 23 states. So Attorney General Thief Ellison said that Minnesota runs the highest turnout, most secure, and frankly, the best elections in America. Yeah, for Democrats. The Trump administration had no legal right to our unredacted voter rolls with Minnesotans' sensitive personal information, like Minnesota Attorney General Thief Ellison cares about your privacy or personal information. Give me a break. I don't buy that for a second. I have to assume that this was the expectation coming from the administration, and that more than likely, this will end up in the hands of the Supreme Court. At least that's what my expectation is. Let's go back to the blaster line. A friend of the show has a comment regarding voter rolls and voting through their experience.
Hi, John. This is Jean, and I'm an election judge in Washington County where we do have to take a certain amount of courses or training, 3 hours worth, to be able to be an election judge. I'm pretty sure the information about the vouching was in there. I happen to remember it because in 2016, we had some guy come in screaming and hollering about how Republicans were terrible people and that he was going to vouch. And there was not much we could do about it. I'm more concerned that someone can walk in and basically give your name like he did. And basically, he could vote for you. We do see if someone's voted. That is one thing. And I don't think it matters if you voted or not. You can still vouch. But most people hand you a license. We aren't able to ask for them. But here's the other problem. On those licenses, there's nothing to say that they are a citizen or not. So there's the other problem. And once they've voted, there's no way to trace those. Once they have a ballot, those ballots are numbered. So it's there's a lot of room for fraud in there.
With that, thank you so much for the blast this morning at 612-584-4565. With that, before we talk with David Gartenstein-Ross, let me get into this story from the Federalist, because as I mentioned, what I'm about to share with you in many ways is applicable to what we're dealing with here in Minnesota. California has now actually told the country that it doesn't know how many non-citizens have been removed from its voter rolls, and that it has no formal policy for investigating illegal voting when it's reported. And this was the concern that we talked about yesterday regarding all the controversy, doing that thing with my fingers, over the James O'Keefe voter vouching stunt that he did last week on the primary. It's this, okay, if there are all these safeguards in place to identify whether or not these vouched individuals are actually registered to vote, able to vote, legally capable of voting, is there going to be any follow-up? And are those votes then removed if it turns out that these individuals are not legally allowed to vote? Now, Jordan Sekalo at the Federalist writes, for years, Americans have been told that concerns about non-citizens voting are a myth, a right-wing talking point unworthy of serious attention. California's own Secretary of State and Attorney General have proven otherwise, however, not by admitting that the state has no idea whether or how often it's even happening, but indicating that the state isn't bothering to track it. So a few weeks ago, the ACLJ submitted 2 California Public Records Act requests, one to the California Secretary of State and the other to the Attorney General. They were seeking records on how the state maintains integrity of its voter rolls. The Attorney General's office took an extension, ultimately responding on August 10th. Now, I'll provide you details on this coming up after my conversation with David Gartenstein-Ross. But as I mentioned, California basically admitted it does not track non-voting citizens on voter rolls as the federal law requires. And once again this morning, you're going to see this and hear this sort of theme. You know, these themes emerge as I'm going through and doing prep for the show. And this morning, it's going to be the fact that those on the left simply don't care. They either feel like they're above the law, they feel justified in their illegal actions, or they simply just do not care at all regarding the rules that they're supposed to be following. And unless there's any sort of prosecutorial follow-up, you know, or any outrage, they're going to continue to be able to get away with what it is that they've been getting away with. And I have examples of this on numerous levels that, again, we'll dive into coming up later on in the show. Right now, I am very pleased to welcome into the show once again AI analyst and expert and CEO at Expert Theory. David Gartenstein-Ross. Good morning, David. Fantastic to see you this morning. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Good morning, John. Great to join you, and I'm finally on camera here.
Yeah, no, man. It's so. Thank you so much once again for the time. I know how much the listeners appreciate your insight, and I do too. And speaking with that, before we dive into some of the material that I shared with you yesterday, let's get into some of the listeners' questions this morning. First one comes via email, john.justice@americanexperiment.org. Tommy the Elder writes, will data centers be overbuilt with many later closed or absorbed by larger companies, much like with what happened during many of the technology high growth cycles? Things like wind generator manufacturing, cell phone explosion, and electric cars all had peak cycles that crashed. So, David, do you see something similar happening when it comes to the emerging data centers regarding artificial intelligence?
Yeah, Tommy the Elder's question is a really interesting one. Ultimately, it's hard for me to forecast. If I were betting, I would bet that they're not overbuilt. Right, on the whole, there's a huge need to store data based on the explosion of data that we have. Number one. Number two, as we've talked about, there's a lot of political opposition at a local level to data centers being built in a variety of places. So, regardless of the future of data centers, right now what you're seeing is like multiple attempts to get them up and running to provide the infrastructure that's needed for the AI boom, and where they emerge and in what amount is something that we don't really know right now. Right, it's not being built as a system; it's a series of individual products. But my guess is that there's just going to be more and more need for data storage, not less need for data storage. So if I were betting, I would bet that it is not a boom, which is then going to go into a bust cycle. But it's hard to have a crystal ball on that one. It's actually a very thought-provoking question.
Do you have insight, David, into the needed storage for artificial intelligence as we would typically compare it to, say, what we store up in the cloud or just documents or information? Because I was curious when it comes to artificial intelligence, what are those storage needs? Is it the generating power? Is it things that are created and those items created need to be secured at a specific location? Can you give us some insight as to why there is this massive need for these data centers and what they would be storing?
Yeah, the answer is all of the above. Data centers are needed to both store the underlying data that goes into large language models. So part of an LLM is taking in as much information as possible, then training the model on basically the corpus of human activity. The reason being, then it's able to smoothly go from taking 2026 text or dialogue in Minneapolis to suddenly generating a 14th century English manuscript. These are the kinds of things that LLMs are trained on and so are able to do. So A, it's the underlying data. B, it's everything that's created. If you look at, in the past, what have data centers been needed for? It's been, everything that goes into data that we need to be able to pull. So for a company, it will include all of their internal documents, images that they've generated, video, which is very important that they've generated, which is very, memory intensive. It'll include all customer information, databases driving sales, things like that. With the AI explosion, there's both an increasing amount of data that LLMs need to pull from, number one. And then number two, the outputs are just greater. You can see this if you compare an AI to, for example, Google or Bing or whatever search engine you prefer. If you look at a Google search, it generates a number of hits, but that's very low data, right? The data is basically, number one, what did you search for? Number two, what search results did you click on? Now you ask a simple question to ChatGPT or even to Google, and if it's in AI mode, and you get like a page of responses. Suddenly we go from there being kind of low data usage in each and every interaction with a computer to much more extended data usage on both sides of the conversation.
talking with David Gartenstein-Ross, the CEO at Expert Theory and our AI analyst and expert. We talked about this briefly last week. Let's go ahead and have a slightly longer conversation about the data centers and something that I was reading last week regarding these data centers. You know, it's obviously been politicized, and there's people from both sides of the political spectrum that are critical of these data centers, depending on where it is that they are going to be built. But one thing that I wasn't anticipating, but it makes sense, is that some of these data centers are actually going up in towns that have basically turned into ghost towns. They're areas where people still live, but they used to be, bustling towns in middle of America, but industries, collapsed and went away and the jobs went away. And so only leaving a handful of people there. But now they're looking at these data centers potentially being built in these areas, which could bring back a lot of individuals and actually revitalize a lot of these towns. And this is an aspect of it that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, but it could, it could end up being a major boon for these towns across America.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And you had Anthropic's CEO come out with a fairly long post about how AI companies have failed to earn the trust of the public. Really interesting post for a variety of reasons. But it's thinking through things like this. When we step back and look at the promise versus the peril of AI, which feeds into your question, but I want to go one level higher.
Sure.
The promise is suddenly we have this super intelligence that enables humanity to do things it never could before. That's an awesome thing to have. It's going to generate an enormous amount of wealth when you think about wealth comprehensively, both in terms of things that have been built. You think about wealth as being richness in hours and richness in time. AI is one of the most tremendous leaps forward in human history. It also creates some of the biggest dangers that we've seen in human history. And that's even before we start talking about AI turning evil and turning us all into slaves to a machine. Job disruption, I know, is something that we may talk about today.
Yeah.
The AI assisting people in killing or taking or creating biological weapons and the like. And this kind of lack of trust that AI companies have engendered extends even to data centers, where they've often been very disruptive to communities. There are communities that are water stressed and the like, which suddenly have a data center which promises to take up a large number of resources. The positive economic benefit is unclear. This is a way that trust has been eroded. Ghost towns, that's a really great way to think about it. I mean, ultimately, given the promise and peril, the promise is that the system, however we define the system, will do a good job of integrating all of this new wealth so we all benefit. The idea that this is dangerous stems from a lot of different reasons, but the main one is that the benefits will be concentrated in the hands of the few. Most people will lose. That is the critique of AI from an economic front. And among other things, if data centers go up in areas where communities are helped and not hurt, that's a way to regain trust, and it's a way for AI companies and those that are associated with them to show that, in some way, benefits from AI and everything that comes with it will extend to many people and not just the few.
Not that I want to go too deep on this, but just a question that popped into my mind. And David, you may or may not have an answer, but I would be curious, what kind of workforce that they would need for this facility. How much of it would be automated, utilizing AI, and again, that would certainly, make a big difference when it comes to whether or not these particular data centers would be enough to go and revitalize a small town. It would be the number of people that would be necessary to go and operate it.
Yeah, I was just trying to do a back of the napkin for the same reasons. I know that in the past, when we've looked at different ways that energy would be generated, that traditional fossil fuel-based plants tend to generate many more jobs than what we can describe as clean energy, solar, wind, and the like. It's an interesting question. I mean, the way that regardless of, the workforce would be for a data center, again, back at the napkin, if it's of sufficient size, it would be at least, probably 50 plus jobs in a data center would be my guess. Um, and if you extend it to contractors, it would be a bit more than that. It might not be enough jobs / people coming in to fully revitalize a community, but that's where we get into the secondary things that often come with big projects. Like some of them may come with building, different community infrastructure, whether it's a
Right.
park or a recreation center or the like. Like done correctly, the data centers could be a tool of community revitalization. I mean, who knows if they'll be done correctly? But like, I like that story because I like there to be some optimistic things against kind of the general push of doom and gloom that we seem to see everywhere these days.
Yeah, David, I wish there was I guess this is a evergreen statement that I could apply to so much of what I talk about on a daily basis. But, I just, it's one of those circumstances where I wish there was coverage of both aspects. We should be concerned about it. We should be looking at the concerns of AI and what kind of impact it'll have on society, but also the benefits of artificial intelligence as well. And unfortunately, with the media being what it is, we don't see the positive, the potential, positive sides of it, and we don't talk about that nearly enough.
Yeah, I agree entirely, and it gets into a lot of other issues as well. I mean, one of those that we haven't spent, I think, a great deal of time on is where is China in all of this, right? President Trump has explicitly fingered China as being a hand behind anti-data center protests, which I think is undoubtedly correct, right? Not that they are the hand, but anytime we look at current political debates, division, polarization, and certain issues with much more tremendous consequence, I think that looking at foreign actors and foreign interference is going to, for the foreseeable future, be a part of how we understand these debates and this discourse.
Before we get into some of the listener questions, let's keep with the theme here. And I found this to be a really interesting piece coming out of the New York Times, an opinion piece published on Friday. Artificial intelligence could displace 18% of the current U.S. jobs within the next 5 years. This is according to internal analysis by Bridgewater Associates. And there's a couple of points in here that I thought were really interesting, David, that I wanted to get your thoughts on. The writers of the opinion piece, two senior executives at the investment firm, they contend that AI could produce a productivity miracle capable of substantially improving living standards, is kind of what you and I were talking about, but only if the governments establish policies that distribute the gains broadly and limit its danger. Now, Bridgewater, it has a $102 billion investment firm that they lead, and they've invested heavily in artificial intelligence. That position, the article that I have from the Daily Wire says, gives them an argument in an unusual dimension. The policies that they recommend could impose costs on their own company and the investment interests that they represent. But clearly, with a $102 billion background, they could afford to absorb some of this. But we've had conversations like this in the past, and I know you've talked about a universal basic income potentially. I don't know if it factors into this, but what are your thoughts on what these two executives at Bridgewater had to say about job displacement?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely correct. You and I have talked about this before, and going back years. And you mentioned universal basic income, and I think it's worth taking a second just to unpack the reference there, what it means to you and I. So a number of years ago, I think this must have been a good 15 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. I mentioned on the show that I support universal basic income, and I made clear it wasn't just then, right? But that it was a policy which I think that ultimately we are going to have to and should implement. And at the time, you and I are both kind of old school conservative, and at the time, I just got filleted for it. And I mentioned at the time what I had in mind, which is exactly this moment that we're in currently. That there's going to be technology will reach the point where it's so disruptive that you need some sort of system to handle the displacement, right? That ultimately, if you have a technology that over 5 years is displacing 18% of U.S. jobs, and if you look in the longer term, that displacement will probably become greater, right? We have a technology that can make entire skill sets irrelevant and cause reskilling of large sections of the workforce almost instantaneously. That's a really hard thing to deal with. And so, so anyway, we don't need to unpack that. And even at the time, I wasn't trying to really make an argument. I was just trying to stake out the position that I have, which I tend to do. I find most of my ideas people disagree with until they don't. But in this particular case, they're correct, right? We with this much disruptiveness, we absolutely have to show that benefits will accrue widely and not just have narrow benefits and widespread disruption. Like nobody wants a technology that benefits a very few people who effectively have won the AI lottery, while 18 plus percentage of people risk job loss and absolute devastation. That is not an attractive future. So I think that they're 100% correct. And maybe like 6 months ago or a year ago, there was an interesting article that you had from a conservative publication about how Reagan era conservative doesn't cut it. Reagan era conservatism doesn't cut it in the age of AI. Now, ultimately, again, like I have a very favorable view of Reagan era conservatism, so I think that's not exactly correct. It's any sort of political philosophy has to adapt to the background that it confronts. And we are in the most disruptive time, perhaps in human history. So are the authors correct? Yes, they're correct. And I don't even think that they're arguing against their investment interests. Maybe they're arguing against their immediate investment interests. But I think when you look at kind of disruption then producing backlash, I know that on your show you've talked about like Democratic Socialists of America and that whole movement, right? Like part of what you have to have in mind when you're looking at this dynamic system is there also can be just the election of leaders who are completely hostile to AI, completely hostile to private property on the whole, or the like. And that political risk also factors in to a long-term economic calculus that a company like Bridgewater would have to take into account.
Talking with David Gartenstein-Ross. He is the CEO at Expert Theory and our AI analyst and expert. If you have any questions for him, john.justice@americanexperiment.org, or you can leave us a blast at 612-584-4565. And with that, David, let's go ahead and get to some of the questions from the friends of the show this morning here on the John Justice Show.
Good morning, John. Mike from Minnetonka. Hey, calling back with a clarification for my question last week. Making an inquiry with Siri, it's asking me if I want to use Chat GPT. I didn't have that information last week. So it's a AI asking permission, if that's the right word, to use a different AI to do an internet search. If you could ask David why it would do that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
David, your thoughts on Michael's follow-up question?
It's a great follow-up question. Why don't we talk about that next week? Because I would just be guessing off the top of my head. There's going to be an actual answer, and I want to get the answer for Mike.
Gotcha. Let me ask you this. And since we're on here, we were having a discussion here at Center of the American Experiment yesterday. We have the policy fellows that write the articles here that you can find at americanexperiment.org. I encourage everybody to head on over there, especially go and check out the Wrong Track Minnesota list. That's a must list of items for every single Minnesotan. But we were discussing, artificial intelligence in the policy field of the economists and healthcare experts and housing and crime experts here. And we were having a bit of a debate over, not even a debate, a discussion over, which programs to use, Perplexity, Claude, ChatGPT. These are all, different large language models that kind of have their own expertise, right? Or is there one that is superior over another? I'd just be curious to get your quick thoughts on that.
My preference is ChatGPT. The reason is it has much higher token limits than the others, meaning that you can do more extended and more interesting work on chat. I know people who prefer other models. I think it's a very individual thing. But relatively recently, I upgraded to a pro subscription on chat. Which has been transformative. the amount, the amount of intelligence at like higher paid tiers that's available is like even greater than I had assumed would be commercially available.
Let's go back to the blaster line at 612-584-4565, and we'll hear from friend of the show, Rich.
Good morning, it's Rich. And I got a question for David. Recently, I've seen the use of AI on interviewing techniques in which they do questionnaire and you do a video online. I'm wondering if they are combining that with like the read technique that criminal investigators use for involuntary movements when a person is untruthful. Is that being integrated with AI, and are companies using that and or law enforcement?
David, do you have any insight on Rich's comment?
I'm certain that that's happening. Yeah, right. Like, I mean, when you look at the usage of AI, and I had trouble hearing the first part of his question, so I believe that what Rich was asking about was interviews of criminal suspects. Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And whether AI is used for tells, like, yeah, I'm 100% certain that that's the case, right? Like, I'm also certain, entirely certain, that it has no probative value, meaning that they can't introduce the AI results in court at all. I think that you know, and your listeners know, that lie detector test results cannot be introduced in court, right? They're not considered to be reliable enough for a wide variety of reasons. So like a lie detector can be used to, to try to clear a suspect or kind of establish a baseline with investigators, but it's not it's not probative in a way that it's considered to be court evidence in and of itself. Same thing with respect to AI. I'm certain that this is that at the very least, in an experimental way, this is being used right now. The reason why I'm certain of that is both, number one, other uses of AI, but number two, this is basic pattern recognition. When you look at different patterns, like eyes going up and to the left versus up and to the right, when you look at patterns like that, AI is very good at catching them, and also pinpointing the exact moment where it happens, going back, rewatching it to compare against other hypotheses. AI is great at that. So yes, it's being used this way. I'm certain of it.
David Gartenstein-Ross, let's wrap on this. I'm just curious to get your thoughts. It stuck out to me. There's a lengthy Wall Street Journal story. Shortly after scoring a multi-million-dollar book deal for a debut author, the novelist's agents pulled the plug. They could no longer support the project, they said, because they couldn't verify that the book had been wholly written by their client. One of the individuals, the crime novelist, has said, this raises so many questions about authorship, what AI means for the industry. It goes on to say, with the new AI scandal engulfing publishing seemingly every month, it's become more difficult to punt questions about its impact into some distant future. The spectacular implosions of big book deals over suspected AI use and the fears who might be next are forcing a reckoning over the nature of authorship. And I know you've had some interesting takes on this regarding whether or not it is or isn't appropriate to, write a book utilizing AI, or, as we talked about before, using it in the classroom. But what was your gut reaction to the story from the Wall Street Journal?
It's a really interesting story. I actually think that underlying all of this is a single question, which is copyright, right? Like, something that's not settled is, to what extent can you copyright material that is written with AI? And there's a spectrum, right? On one end of the spectrum, there is something that is wholly AI generated, like build me a 90,000 word thriller about John Justice. Like, with that as a prompt, like that, there's no real claim to copyright or human authorship. That's just AI writing something that you ask it to write. Then on the other end of the spectrum, like, let's not use kind of the other end being no AI was involved, but let's use it this way. that an author queries AI to critique the manuscript, uses it as a line editor, and like uses it to ask about prose. That would be human authorship with AI serving the function of a dialogue partner. That's sort of should be 0% controversial. Then there's a gradation in between. What if some scenes are written by AI? What if AI is being used to clean up passages or sentences or the like? So I know that one of the major associations has the idea of a 5% de minimis usage. The Authors Guild is like this powerful body within the publishing industry, and their guidance is that spelling/grammar tools, background research, sounding board use are unproblematic. AI generated prose to them being put directly into a book and being presented as human written is problematic. And so they have a model contract language that suggests disclosure of AI generated text and negotiated limits such as de minimis use, like 5% of it can be coming from AI. Ultimately, I think that at some point there's going to be a copyright suit about a book that was generated, that was written with AI generated text as a part of the book. That will, I think, actually settle out the issue and establish the baseline as to where it lies. But within the publishing industry, nobody wants to take that financial risk, especially if you're putting millions of dollars behind a book and it's possible that copyright can't hold. That is a huge issue. In terms of where I come down, I think that when copyright is settled, I don't have a problem with AI as a writing tool. If it's used poorly, it will create bad books. To me, we should use AI as an opportunity to elevate, as opposed to an opportunity to try to, push out on the whole. If AI can do something better than me, I want it to do that rather than me. And I think that's the way, not just we should approach it. In the longer term, I think that's the way that we will approach it. That ultimately, if this amazing transformative technology brings out the best of us, then we will prosper as a species, as humanity. If instead it can produce a race to the bottom with only a few people benefiting, that is not what any of us should want. And as all of the threads through all the articles point to, this is a critical time in determining which way we're going to go with respect to this amazing and extraordinarily disruptive technology.
If you have any questions for David, I'm happy to go and forward those along to our AI expert and analyst and the CEO at Expert Theory. Just email me, john.justice@americanexperiment.org. That's JON. David, I so enjoyed these conversations, and thank you so much for the time this morning. And if we can, let's do it again next week.
I look forward to it, John.
Thanks, David. All right, coming up, we're going to get back into the issue of voting and voter rolls, as we were talking about. We have some talkbacks that rolled in from the conversation earlier this hour, and I'll get you reset up. I'll reintroduce you to the story we were covering, including this Federalist article that might as well have been written about the concerns that we have of voter integrity here in Minnesota. Also an update on the vandals in Blaine as well. I want to take a quick moment and just remind you that if you are having difficulty getting a good night's sleep, do what I did and simply try out the night gummies at Mini-Leaf, MINNELEAF.com. You take one right before you go to bed. You sleep soundly, and even if you get up, like I do, because I get up multiple times a night, but as soon as I hit the sheets, I am passed back out. That's what the night gummies do. And I wake up feeling refreshed, ready to hit the road and come in to do the show every single Monday through Friday. Head on over to MINNELEAF.com. The mission of Eric and his wife at Mini-Leaf is for you to live a better life through their products, and I'm a testament to that. You can check out their fun gummies, their spooky Mini-Leaf tonics. Also, they have really effective Triple Diamond Pain Cream, but as I've said many times, the night gummies, the absolute game changer in getting my sleep back on track, and they'll do the same for you. Head on over to MINNELEAF.com and you'll taste happy at Minileaf.com. the second hour for a Tuesday here on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment. Head on over to AmericanExperiment.org. Check out all of the fantastic articles written by the policy fellows here at American Experiment, one of which, our economist, John Phelan, will be joining us, talking Amy Klobuchar and her ideas to help decrease healthcare costs and whether or not she would even be capable of doing that as a governor. There's a brand new piece available at AmericanExperiment.org, and we'll have John on the couch coming up at 8:30 here at the center of the American Experiment studios. Also, remember at the website, if you want to make a donation to American Experiment, you can get yourself a free embroidered John Justice Show hat. Just hit the link to my page on the pop-up window on the homepage at AmericanExperiment.org and scroll on down to the bottom, and you can hit the link and make a donation and get one of the official John Justice Show embroidered hats. Also, all the details and information regarding the show are available right there on my webpage at AmericanExperiment.org. We kicked off the show talking about one of the big stories of the morning. A federal judge dismissed the Trump administration's lawsuit seeking the Minnesota voter rolls, calling it a fishing expedition. The ruling protects voter privacy, as the administration had no legal basis to demand the unredacted voter information, according to this leftist judge. As I mentioned when I was talking about the story at the top of the show in the first hour, my expectation is that the administration probably expected that this was the ruling they were going to get. And as so many of these types of issues go when it comes to these judges pushing back against the administration, usually it's a first step to get it up to the Supreme Court. And so I expect that will be something similar that happens here. Now, a few of you left comments on the blaster line on the first hour of the show regarding this story and the story we're about to get into. California admitting it doesn't track non-citizens on voter rolls as federal law requires. But let's get to some of your thoughts from the blaster line here on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment.
How in the heck would a judge say you can't see the names of the people who are voting when the problem is you got people voting who shouldn't be voting? You don't know if they're dead or illegal or otherwise prohibited unless you know who's voting. Good Lord, that is a stupid decision.
So there's a legal basis for it, but let me get to the heart of what you're saying, and let me add an element to this. Here's the part of it that drives me nuts. This isn't about voter privacy at all. You know, campaigns, parties have access to voter rolls. Do you think that they're caring about the issue of privacy? I mean, corporations, nonprofits have access to voter rolls. There's way more people that have access to these voter rolls, right, than most people, I think, even realize. So the last place that you should ever be worried about in terms of your voter integrity, right? It's on the list. Don't misunderstand. But when it comes to an actual state, this isn't what it's about. It's about hiding whatever it is that they don't want people to see. And this is the point that I wanted to make. If you have nothing to hide, why share it? If you have a bunch of other states who did share their information, then the arguments coming from the Secretary of State, Steve Simon, aren't worth anything. What are they trying to hide? And why wouldn't you? More specifically, why wouldn't you want to make sure that there wasn't any shenanigans, for lack of a better way to describe going on? Why wouldn't you want to make sure that everybody who is voting is actually legal to vote? We know the answers to that. But the reality is, if you're interested in voter integrity, none of what the Trump administration is doing is any sort of problem whatsoever. If you're interested in making sure that we have secure elections and that people who are not legally able to go and vote aren't voting, but they don't, because they want to be able to game the system. They wanted to invite that fraud. It benefits those on the left and those that seek to hide these voter rolls. Let's go and hear from a friend of the show up from my neighborhood in Blaine.
Hey, John, this is Joe up in Blaine. The AG claiming that we can't give them the voter data because of Minnesotans' privacy. They don't want the government to have all this information. You mean like
all the other information they have because of our social security numbers and our filing of taxes and work reports and other happy goodness stuff like that kind of information. What information does the state of Minnesota have that the government doesn't already have or can't get really easily?
Yeah.
Bogus.
Well,
have a great day.
Thank you, Joe, and you made the point. But we don't have access to the voter rolls, so we can't go and determine whether or not there is a level of security and integrity within our elections. And look at what's happening in California. So a few weeks ago, the ACLJ, right, and this comes from the Federalist, submitted 2 Public Records Act requests. They were seeking records on how the state maintains the integrity of its voter rolls. The Attorney General's office in California took an extension and ultimately responded on August 10th. The Secretary of State's office responded first, but refused to provide any records responsive to the request from the Federalist. According to its answer, the statewide voter registration system simply does not contain a specific cancellation reason for non-citizenship. In other words, the state cannot tell them how many non-citizens have ever been removed from its voter rolls because it doesn't keep that information at all. Now, first they asked for the number of voter registrations that were canceled because the registrant didn't meet citizenship requirements. California said its system does not contain the voter status reason for cancellation due to non-citizenship. So here's a question that I have, going back to James O'Keefe and his voter vouching stunt on primary day. We were told, rightfully so, it's accurate information from multiple individuals, experts, that there are safeguards in place when you go and vouch for somebody. There's a sort of a chain of identifying ways to go and identify whether or not this person that's been vouched for by a random individual is actually legally able to go and vote. Well, are we dealing with the same situation as California? Because California was asked something very, very similar, and they said they basically don't even look at the data. They don't even have the data. Does not contain a voter status reason for cancellation due to non-citizenship. Now, they went and also asked for records on programs the state uses to keep its voter rolls accurate and current. California pointed to training manuals that new registrants are checked against death records, felony records from the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and DMV change of address records, but not citizenship. Third, they went and asked for records on how the state handles complaints submitted through the election voter complaint form. Rather than treat this as a records request, California treated it as a question, provided no records, and said that complaints are forwarded to the elections division staff for further review and investigation. So they basically said, oh, they take care of it over here, and then they didn't get an answer. Fourth, they asked for the outcomes of investigations into specific illegal voting. California said it simply does not maintain those statistics. On the second records request, the response they received doesn't inspire any more confidence than the Secretary of State did. They asked California's Department of Justice for 3 things: records on the programs and activities the state uses to keep its voter rolls accurate and current, records on the state's policies for handling investigative referrals of illegal voting, records of the outcomes of those illegal voting referrals with private information about the individuals involved excluded. The answer to the second request was blunt. The California DOJ responded to the Freedom of Information Act, stating that it has no records containing or addressing policies that are specific to handling investigative referrals for illegal voting. California's own Department of Justice has no written policy for what happens when someone reports illegal voting. Not redacted, not withheld, non-existent. So what does this all mean? It means that they simply do not care if individuals are illegal aliens and voting in their elections. And they are showing this through the fact that there is no official means for the officials in California to even track it. So that raises the question in my mind, do we have it here? Do we have the ability here to go and track illegals, or are we in the same boat as California. Let me get into more of this, though, because there's more similarities here. Despite the fact that the California Secretary of State promised that referrals were made for prosecution, though it keeps no record of them, the California DOJ says they have no policy regarding such investigative referrals for illegal voting. As for the two other requests, the DOJ found records that could be responsive, but needs more time to review them for redactions and exemptions. And they're now told to expect that response at the end of the month. So they're basically being stonewalled on the other issues. The problem for California is that federal law requires every state to maintain records showing how it safeguards the accuracy of its voter rolls and to make sure that those records are available to the public. But California's Secretary of State just admitted in writing that it keeps no such records regarding the removal of non-citizens from its rolls. That's convenient, but it's also awful. This isn't a case of simply lacking a category for record keeping in general. California's own system does track cancellations for other reasons. Death, moving out of state, felony convictions, those all strip voting rights from an individual. Those categories exist and are documented. The one category missing is citizenship. It's not an oversight, it's a choice. And here's where the state goes and undermines itself. In that same response from the Secretary of State, California pointed out that voters must attest under penalty of perjury that they meet every eligibility requirement, including citizenship, and that the state clearly bars non-citizens from registering. Doesn't all this sound familiar? The little oath that we take before we go and vote? Translation, don't worry, everybody, it's totally legal. And anybody, in the case of James O'Keefe, that would go to potentially undermine the state's view that it's illegal is going to have to deal with the consequences of the law. And yet, in the case of California, individuals who are voting in the elections illegally, there's no way to even go and handle it because they have no official process to do so. The article goes on to say, but if the state isn't tracking when the law gets broken and someone removed for violating it and the attorney general potentially isn't keeping records of investigative referrals of illegal voting, the reassurance that it's all legal is hollow. You can't claim a safeguard is working if you have no records showing whether it's been triggered or how it's been investigated. And I would use that same line towards Secretary of State Steve Simon in this court victory against the Trump administration to get our voter rolls here. You cannot sit back and claim that we have this voter integrity as Attorney General Thief Ellison did, as Steve Simon did, and still in the same breath go, but I'm not going to go and prove my work by turning over the voter rolls to the Trump administration to prove to them that all of our elections are the most secure and on the up and up. You can't have it both ways. They are, courtesy of our local Minnesota media, but they shouldn't be allowed to. It's also worth noting that California doesn't require proof of citizenship or lawful presence for certain categories of driver's licenses. Again, to which I say, doesn't that sound familiar? It's the same kind of licensing pathway that triggered New Jersey's non-citizen voter roll problem, and driver's licenses are used to establish identity. The California Secretary of State's office now has told the country that it doesn't know how many non-citizens have been removed from its voter rolls. The Attorney General's office admitted it has no formal policy for investigating illegal voting when it's reported. It's not a technicality. That's a transparency failure in need of further investigation. To which I'm going to email Jordan Sekalu and tell them, hey, you should go and do the same thing here for Minnesota, because I think it's going to be a real easy article to write, because you pretty much need to take all the details you found in here and just go and switch California for Minnesota, and you're probably going to find that it's mostly all the same information. And going back to the previous comment that I made from the blast that we got, why wouldn't you want integrity in our elections? Everyone should. But unfortunately, we have a party that banks on individuals who are not legally able to go and vote to be involved in our elections. They go and encourage it. Let's get to some of your thoughts from the blaster line at 612-584-4565. Again, 612-584-4565 here on the John Justice Show.
Yeah, follow up to the voter issue is I'm kind of wondering why the administration hasn't already utilized FISA courts. This is the exact situation there. created for, to confront national security risks. And with all these foreign players trying to undermine and destroy the United States and make it less effective, it is a legitimate security risk. So they've got their forensic auditors. They can make everything admissible in court. I don't know why they've not used it.
Thank you so much for the comment. If you would like to leave a blast to 612-584-4565. And just a word to those leaving the blast. We're looking for ways to provide better audio quality from the blaster comments. So when you leave a blast, be sure you speak as clearly as possible and speak up as well. It's better than it was. We've gotten some of the bugs worked out, but I fully admit that the audio quality isn't where we would like it to be, and I'm still searching for another alternative to that. So if you go and leave a blast, just be sure that you're speaking loudly enough for everybody to hear. Before I get you updated on the Blaine Police Department saying that the vandalism of a council member's car wasn't political, and if anybody has any further information on this, I would love to hear it, because it seems as if this was juveniles as I was describing it yesterday. I still personally, though, have a hard time believing there wasn't some sort of politics in play based off of Leslie Larson being on the city council, her specific car targeted over the other vehicles that were in her driveway as well. So if you have anything to add, you can email me, john.justice@americanexperiment.org. That's JON, or drop a blast at 612-584-4565. Before we go there, though, I want to share with you this chunk of audio. Found it yesterday as I was prepping for the show. Everything that we assumed about the Biden administration is turning out to be accurate. Much in the same way, everything that we thought about how the COVID pandemic was exploited to benefit the progressive agenda has also turned out in large part to be true. The same thing absolutely rings true when it comes to Joe Biden, his lack of mental acuity, the concerns about his health. This is all being exposed in a new interview. Barry Weiss sat down with lead anchor at CNN, Jake Tapper, and he flat out admits that they all knew that Joe Biden wasn't really the president and calling the shots, even going so far as to talk about what they described within the Biden administration as a Politburo, a point that was not lost on Barry Weiss in this interview with Jake Tapper. Listen to this here on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment.
I would say the right-wing meme about Joe Biden was that Dr. Joe Biden was sort of the shadow president and sort of running the country. What your book shows is that that's not totally far off. It's not Joe Biden, though. It's this group of tight advisors around Joe Biden who I want you to talk about, that you call the Politburo, which is an interesting word choice. Tell me about the word choice, and then tell me about those people who were really calling the shots around the president.
So the Politburo, not a term we came up with, it's a term from within the Biden administration. As the name would suggest, is a tightly held group of senior advisors. Mike Donilon and Steve Ricchetti, foremost among them. You also have individuals floating in and out. Ron Klain, who's chief of staff for the first couple of years of the president's term. Anita Dunn, some senior individuals on the staff of Jill Biden, the first lady. Anthony Bernal, the chief of staff, perhaps the most powerful First Lady Chief of Staff ever, and then another woman named Annie Tomasini. And so we would assess that it's basically the Bidens, Joe, Jill, and Hunter, and this tight group of aides. And they weren't like a star chamber. They weren't like all friends or allies. They all just had their different portfolios and did what they did. And these were the individuals that helped steer the government. Now, is that different from any other president? On one level, no. On one level, obviously, a first family has its priorities and every president has aides. But on another level, yes, definitely. There was more power vested in these individuals, according to cabinet secretaries that we spoke with, who said that at best Joe Biden was the senior member of a board, and that the Politburo was cordoning him off starting basically in 2023, 2024.
All right, so in this clip, Jake Tapper is saying that they all knew that Biden wasn't really in charge. He wasn't really the one that was running the country. Him being a lead anchor at CNN, everyone else must have known too. But that is...
And I'll stop it here. This was further commentary from Wall Street Apes that originally went and posted this this audio clip. But as I mentioned before, everything that we assumed was true, to the point where they actually had a name for the group of individuals that were tasked with making sure that, you know, they kept a tight lid around Joe Biden and didn't allow the commentary around his mental health and grow to a point where it couldn't be handled. They had a group that was there to deal with the issue. What we all assumed all along. You know, it is not a shock as to why people do not trust the media or the government. When you get on a long enough timeline and suddenly all of these individuals are more than willing to go and admit what we assumed all along. Well, where were you when this was all happening? Why wasn't somebody, you know the answer. I'm speaking hypothetically. You know, the left goes and protects their own. It's just how this works. But it's the quintessential, they knew and they let it happen. And that's what Jake Tapper was laying out there to Bari Weiss. Not a huge surprise, but just confirmation of something that we all saw with our own eyes and guessed that there would be a group that was tasked with making sure that they were hiding Biden's cognitive decline as best as they possibly could. All right, coming up. Blaine Police Department says the vandalism of a city council member who's running for the Minnesota House of Representatives as a Republican was not related to her political campaign. I'm not sure that I buy that. I'll give you details, and then we're going to dive into sex enters into the mix relating to fraud. $2.5 million Medicaid fraud tied to Minneapolis sex trafficking ring involving an ex-county prosecutor. I have two different versions of the story on this. One coming from Channel 5 and the other coming from Bill Glahn, policy fellow here at American Experiment. And I have a couple of clips from our local media that I will share with you as well coming up on the show. First off, I want to mention that, listen, be honest. Your old self might be disappointed in how you are right now, right? Life happens, and often we put on way too many pounds than we should be carrying, and it's incredibly unhealthy to be carrying around all that weight. Take it from somebody who's gone through this weight loss experience and is going through a second round of weight loss through the NutraWave program. Life is so much easier when you're not carrying around that extra weight. I've lost, now going on 26 pounds on the program. I went through the first round, I stopped the program, went back to my normal eating habits, but my relationship with food changed while I still enjoyed the food that I love to eat. And I didn't put any weight back on. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go through another round on the program so that I can get down to the weight that I'm supposed to be, a weight that I haven't been since I was, back in my early 30s, late 20s, for crying out loud. I don't think my wife has ever known me when I've weighed this less before. Start your own weight loss journey today and think about it. You know how quickly time flies? Before you know it, October is going to be here. The state fair is going to be here. Before that, holidays are right around the corner. If you start the program within the next week or so, by the time you hit the holidays, you'll be a brand new you. You can make all of the holiday festivities even better, and you'll be able to enjoy all that amazing food. No pills and no shots. NutraWave for over 13 years has helped thousands of men and women lose the weight, and they'll do the same for you just like they did for me. Reach out to them today, 952-260-1965. Again, 952-260-1965. Mention the keyword strike, and there's a almost $300 valued gift awaiting for you. There's limited spots available, so call today. You get a Truth Metabolic Scan and a free red light therapy session. Just mention the keyword strike at 952-260-1965. No pills, no shots. It's NutraWave, NutriWave.us. Individual results may vary.
If you would like to support The John Justice Show, become an advertiser. Competitive rates for both personal endorsements and standard ads are available. For more details, email john.justice@americanexperiment.org.
It's John Justice, and after discovering Mini Leaf's night gummies, it's no longer a challenge getting a restful night's sleep. At minileaf.com, you'll see their fantastic line of products like delicious chocolates, pain creams, and fun gummies. But for me, it's Mini Leaf's night gummies with their all-natural ingredients that have been an absolute game changer. You take one right before bed and wake up feeling rejuvenated. Head on over to MINNELEAF.com. That's minileaf.com and get your sleep back on track.
And now, here's commentary on the latest issues facing Minnesotans from the hosts, policy fellows, and guests of American Experiment. For more content, head on over to the Center of the American Experiment.org.
We break it down piece by piece again at AmericanExperiment.org. But for example, when the FBI first raided Feeding Your Futures offices, she that week was calling for protected status for immigrants from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. When the Department of Justice indicted Amy Bach and 46 others, which was the largest fraud indictment in Minnesota history at the time, she was releasing a statement on resuming full immigrant visa services in Havana. And when Amy Bach was found guilty, she was calling on Trump to reverse the illegal firing of FTC commissioners.
Think about it. Minnesota has always been a low-crime state. But according to the most recent Bureau of Criminal Apprehension data, we are now above the national average when it comes to Part 1 crimes, a category that includes crimes like murder, assault, rape, and carjackings. Think about it. Minnesota is now a high-crime state. Visit highcrimemn.com to learn more. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
Between January 20th, 2022, so that was when the FBI first raided Feeding Our Futures offices. Between then and then December 31st, 2025, right before she launched her campaign for governor, Amy Klobuchar issued over 1,000 press releases, 1,085, and not a single one of them addressed the Minnesota fraud scandal.
If you would like to support the John Justice Show, become an advertiser. For more details, email john.justice@americanexperiment.org.
It's John Justice, and be honest, your old self would be disappointed in you right now. That was certainly the case for me. And then I found the NutraWave program. You used to own the room, now you don't anymore. Let's change that starting right now. With no pills and no shots, NutraWave, over 13 years, has helped thousands of men and women lose the weight and keep it off for good. I've lost 25 pounds on this amazing program, and I cannot say enough good things about NutraWave. It all starts with a free Truth metabolic scan plus a free red light therapy session. You've got nothing to lose and everything to gain except all the weight. Spots are limited and they go fast. Call today at 952-260-1965. Mention the word strike. Again, 952-260-1965 and mention the word strike, and that almost $300 value is yours absolutely free. No pills, no shots. NutraWave at NutriWave.us. Proud sponsor here of the John Justice Show. Results may vary.
Think about it. A famous politician once said, "You're entitled to your opinion, but you are not entitled to your own facts." But in a world full of AI and fake news, where can Minnesotans find the facts? Center of the American Experiment is Minnesota's go-to source for fact-based analysis and common sense solutions for taxes, energy, public safety, and our kids' education. Visit AmericanExperiment.org for more information. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
Blaine police say the vandalization of a city council member's car on Saturday morning is not connected to her political campaign. Emily Bowdy with 5 Eyewitness News here. Leslie Larson, who's running for the Minnesota House, reported the incident early Saturday morning. Around 1:30 a.m., you can see in the video here, 4 masked individuals are seen putting printouts of a hand displaying the middle finger on Larson's car. Now, Larson reported the incident on Saturday, saying she feared it was connected to her campaign. On Monday, Blaine police said they've chalked the incident up to, quote, juvenile activity, adding there's been no arrests or citations. Now, Larson says she's, quote, relieved to learn there's no threat to my family. You can read her full statement and more information about the incident online at KSTP.com.
Okay, so what happened? It's the John Justice Show presented by American Experiment. So we have all this coverage on the story, okay, because it's relevant. I think the concerns that this was politically motivated are also incredibly relevant, considering this is an individual who's running for a higher office, currently sitting on the board of the city council in Blaine. Her specific car was targeted with these ridiculous middle fingers. So what's the story? Like, do we deserve to know at this point? I mean, I kind of feel like we do. Like, we've covered it at this point. And listen, I like Leslie. Leslie's great. Absolutely. She's fantastic. I just would like to know, okay, if it wasn't politically motivated and this was just juveniles doing juvenile things, that's a very specific thing to do. Like, and I made the analogy yesterday of TPing somebody's home. Okay, that's just, you TP somebody's home, it gives you a visual, it's a pain in the butt for the person to clean up, whatever, it's a prank. But to go and photocopy a bunch of middle fingers and put them on a car, I mean, obviously they were upset at something. What were they upset about? So I personally hope that we get more details on this based off the fact that that just doesn't happen. Why did they go? If you, and like I said, if you have insight, feel free. You can drop me a post on X at John Justice, JON. You can leave us a blast, 612-584-4565, or email me and I'll keep you anonymous, john.justice@americanexperiment.org. But it's something motivated these cowardly, and they are cowardly, these cowardly juvenile teens to go and photograph middle fingers and then make photocopies and put them on her car. I would just like to know what the reason was for it, because that does not make a lot of sense to me. All right, let's go here. From Fox 9, a sex trafficking ring in Hennepin County, allegedly led by Frank Reeves and involving Andrea Sampson, who we talked about yesterday on the show, is facing additional Medicaid fraud charges. So now you can bring, sex trafficking, sex crimes into the issue of rampant fraud here in Minnesota. I did not predict that. And at this point, what other parts of society, of these Medicaid-funded services, should we be going and examining? I've made reference to this line on the show many times throughout the years, but it rings true. One of my favorite moments from Ed Harris in Apollo 13, as he's playing the director of NASA, is everybody's arguing about what's happened with the space capsule. And he tells everybody in the room to shut up, to stop. He's like, can we look at this from an angle of status? What do we have left on this ship that's good? Every single one of the programs wherein taxpayer dollars through Medicaid funding, providing services for individuals, every single place where that is happening, regardless of the business healthcare sector, needs to be examined top to bottom. Because it seems like as we go on the timeline, there's another element that even those individuals like myself couldn't have predicted, and this is one of them. Investigators allege the group used shell companies to hide profits from the trafficking operation and build Medicaid for the fraudulent services, totaling approximately $2.5 million. Sampson, a former county prosecutor, is accused of providing locations for the trafficking and helping to maintain the shell companies. I suppose as a prosecutor, she has a little bit of insight into exactly what she would be, what she would end up facing regarding these allegations. Let's bring you some more coverage of this particular story coming from our local news outlets on, again, $2.5 million in fraud tied to the Minneapolis sex trafficking ring involving this Anoka County prosecutor.
No one wants to be involved in a sex trafficking ring. It is something that happens to you. The 13 victims and others are victims and suffered great harm.
A former assistant Anoka County attorney is accused.
Let me pause it real quick. That was Hennepin County Attorney Scary Moriarty. I'll jump to a comment that I made within my notes. So when it comes to all of the accused in this story, suddenly now Scary Moriarty and her, her religious zealotry over social justice is gone. I'm not saying that it should be there, but it's interesting that I don't hear any calls for restorative justice. You won't hear any calls for restorative justice when it comes to these individuals, because Scary Moriarty, the Hennepin County attorney, she's a biased individual. And so she specifically selects only that which is most expedient to the left to go and deploy her social justice views. These individuals will not be looked at typically as you see other individuals accused of crimes within the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. She's handling this the way that all of them should be held. That's my point. I'm not saying there should be any restorative justice here, for these alleged criminals at all. I mean, how stupid do you have to be to work, as I mentioned yesterday, how stupid do you have to be to work as hard as one would have to work to become a county prosecutor just to go and completely throw it away because you already weren't getting enough money and you had to get involved in a multi-year long sex trafficking operation? No. If these individuals are found guilty, you throw the book at them. Accountability. I just find it amusing. The Scary Moriarty suddenly is sounding like, an individual like myself or you would sound in the wake of this situation where typically, no, she's more about her social justice zealotry. There's no consistency. It's the easy way to say it. Let's get back to the
Accused
story.
of helping run a sex trafficking organization in Hennepin County. Andrea Sampson was arrested Friday after a BCA investigation that began in 2021.
She is alleged to have secured and provided locations for commercial sex transactions. She also allegedly assisted in maintaining shell companies to hide and funnel profits. All this while working as an assistant county attorney. Court documents go on to say the guns were wielded to, quote, keep the victims in line. Those documents also say that Sampson was alleged to have been part of operating an assisted living and or autism sites. Moriarty would not elaborate on that today, instead just focusing on the charges.
This was a complicated scheme. This was a scheme that was designed not only to exploit the victims in these cases, take advantage of them, but also structured to hide the money and the proceeds that was done with multiple individuals, including building out shell companies.
One thing you learn when you see these stories, especially in Democrat states, is when you have people that are involved with crimes like this, they are always involved in more crimes, and they're always involved in things like autism centers, home health care, and wouldn't you know it, they are. These same criminals right here, the three that are involved in this sex trafficking case, wouldn't you know it, they are also billing Medicaid for huge amounts of money.
Yep. The initial story there coming from local CBS News with further commentary provided by Wall Street Apes as they pulled this clip from X. Investigators, as was mentioned, say the 13 victims described being forced to pay for online ads and leave $100 in envelopes at homes in Minneapolis, St. Louis Park, Bloomington, many owned by Andrea Simpson. And again, I just, evil. I've used evil more when describing individuals recently than I ever have in my radio career. Drew Evans, the superintendent at the BCA, said this was a complicated scheme, and a scheme that was designed not only to exploit the victims in these cases, take advantage of them, but also structured to hide the money in the proceeds that was done with multiple individuals, including building out shell companies. Scary Moriarty, the Hennepin County attorney, said Ms. Sampson, who was at the time working as an attorney in Anoka County Attorney's Office, secured and provided locations for commercial sex transactions, also assisted in maintaining the shell companies to hide and funnel profits from the sex trafficking ring. Sampson, who started working as an Anoka County prosecutor in 2017, arrested in February, and is no longer employed there, according to Moriarty. It's disappointing, and all the kinds of things I could comment on, I think at this point, because we are in the prosecution stage of this. Appropriate slip of the tongue there, by the way. It's not appropriate for me to comment on that, and I know that she is no longer working there as well. As I mentioned before, do not expect any sort of calls for social justice to be deployed for these individuals because it's not politically expedient for Hennepin County attorney Scary Moriarty. The suspects also allegedly used some sex trafficking victims to recruit fake Medicaid patients. 3 suspects appeared in court, had bail set at $1 million with the possibility of lower bail under certain conditions. They're due back in court next month. Investigators credit the victims for helping bring the operation down. During the press conference, it was stated that coming forward with individuals that exploited them on an ongoing basis, threatened them at different times, takes true bravery and courage. While the women involved with Reeves were all romantically linked to him, investigators believe that Sampson went from being one of Reeves' sex workers to a co-conspirator. However, it's unclear whether that happened before or after she joined the Anoka County Attorney's Office. The group's alleged scheme spanned several years, with businesses conducted at multiple homes and millions in Medicaid billing tied to fraudulent services. It's still unclear how and when Sampson transitioned from being a sex worker to a co-conspirator and whether this occurred before or after she became a prosecutor in Anoka County. It's an angle on the fraud that I simply did not expect. John.justice at AmericanExperiment.org. If you want to leave me an email, you can also go and leave a comment on the Blaster line, 612-584-4565.
John, I'm with you. I believe that this person was.
This is going back to the Vandals story that we were talking about a moment ago here on the show.
Because they're Republican. But we can't have that narrative. Now, if it was about the Democrats, we'd be talking flashbacks about the Horton murder and how it's a threat to these people for public office. But you're telling me this woman just was singled out for no reason.
Yeah, and listen, and like I said before, just to put a period on that, you know, I trust Leslie Larson's comments on it. If she says that it wasn't politically motivated, it wasn't politically motivated. I would just be very curious as to, you know, what exactly had transpired there. Getting back to the further evidence of fraud, this time involving sex trafficking, Bill Glahn has a piece up this morning at American Experiment. Salman Ahmed Elmi, a 2021 Outstanding Refugee Award recipient, has been charged with 8 felony counts of Medicaid fraud linked to the sex trafficking ring. The 3 co-conspirators appeared in court for bail hearings with the 4th defendant's hearing scheduled for today. So KARE 11's Lou Raguse reported on this yesterday. Here's a bit of his reporting here on the John Justice Show presented by American Experiment.
The big sex trafficking case in Hennepin County is also a major fraud case, with the defendants allegedly using the sex trafficking victims as phony employees and patients when they billed the state for taxpayer Medicaid reimbursements, all with the help of this guy, Salman Elmi, who was just charged in Ramsey County with Medicaid fraud. Elmi owns a home health care company called Riva Health with the top defendant in the trafficking case, Frank Reeves, that is billed for $2.5 million in taxpayer money for mental health services that investigators say were not provided. Trafficking suspect Andrea Sampson owns an autism center, an assisted living center, and a housing stabilization services business that also billed for a total of more than $2 million. Elmi was a celebrated Minnesota entrepreneur, getting an award from the Minnesota Department of Human Services as an outstanding refugee. His website says Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank, gave him $1 million investment for an app that he came up with. Back to the Medicaid fraud. The criminal complaint says the defendants gave one victim the job title mental health worker, another autism provider for kids, in order to scam the state. Lots more still to come on this case. I'm Lou Raguse. Follow for more news.
Man, you know, the amount of money, we're never going to know. We're never going to know. We have our estimates. The leftists push back on those estimates, only going by the official numbers that get released, not bothering to look at just simple extrapolation from the number of stories that we talk about regarding fraud on a weekly basis here in Minnesota. But you look at this story here, we've now reached, you know, systemic sex fraud involving Medicaid service providers. And again, I couldn't even have predicted this, which just raises the question of where haven't we looked and where haven't we seen the fraud yet? If there's any program that's billing for Medicaid services, it's pretty easy to just assume that it's going to be filled with some massive level of fraud. And to go back to what I was just saying, we're never going to know how much money has left the state. What kind of state could this be if it wasn't for all of this fraud money? And where is it going? It's not all going overseas. Not by a long shot. Now, I know many of you have speculated, and there's a lot of informed speculation, that a lot of this money goes right back into potentially and allegedly campaigns. Individuals running for office. Which all raises a really, really interesting hypothetical question. So I was listening to the Tim Pool podcast. It was either this morning or yesterday. And they've been on this particular topic for a while now. And it's really, really interesting. I'm waiting to see further details come out. But what's fascinating is the unintended consequences that many people believe, some that have more than just anecdotal evidence of this, that with the removal of the USAID funds, suddenly now we are seeing this correlating drop in viewership across the board on multiple outlets. You're talking about television shows, streaming. You're talking about individuals' YouTube shows, to the point where YouTube has actually gone so far as to change their algorithm because there's been such a massive drop in viewership across so many of these once popular platforms. So why do I bring this up regarding USAID? There's another aspect of this, because also there's been fewer on-the-street protests during the summer than we've seen over the course of the past 10 years. And there's evidence relating to how USAID was propping up artificially all of these different sectors of society. And since Donald Trump came in, and partly because of what Elon Musk did with Doge and removed the USAID funding, that suddenly now the mechanisms that were in place to prop up artificially left-wing leaning television shows, left-wing leaning commentary on social media and on YouTube, it's all evaporated. And there's been this massive just plummeting in viewership. And the same thing rings true when it comes to the on-the-street protests that have been taking place. I bring all of this up because we still have yet to really stop all the fraud. Like, there's still fraud taking place right now. I mean, this story that I was just discussing regarding the sex trafficking fraud is evidence of that. There were individuals up until not all that long ago, a handful of months, that were still conducting acts of fraud. It was only a few months ago that Governor Tim Walz was put into a position where it became so publicly well known that the fraud was taking place that even his hand was forced to go and shut down some 14 different service providers that ended up being all fraudulent, the housing stabilization services. So what kind of impact is this going to potentially have here in Minnesota? What was being artificially propped up because of the billions of dollars in fraud that was being stolen from you and from me and from producer Devin this morning, of which I apologize because I don't think I introduced you yet today. So my apologies for that. It's good to see you, though, sir.
Good morning.
I'm sorry about that. Better late than never, right? I've enjoyed your company since you arrived this morning, so my apologies for not introducing you earlier. I got swept up in my own story when I kicked off the show today. Just wait. Just wait. This is going to be an angle on this issue that over the course of probably the next year, and certainly heading into the 2028 presidential election, that I firmly believe is going to see some exposure. What was and what has this fraud to the tune of billions of dollars? Where has that money been going? Where has it been funneled to? And if we stop the fraud, what are the unintended consequences of that? What are we going to see here in Minnesota? Stay tuned. Let's get back to some of your thoughts from the Blaster line, 612-584-4565. Let your voice be heard.
Hey, John, great show. Okay, so Hennepin County, we're against sex trafficking. Also, Minneapolis and Hennepin County, we need a bathhouse. Make it make sense.
No, it makes no sense. And I thought about exactly the same thing, Wade, and thank you so much for bringing it up. Like, I get, look, the individuals that are involved in the sex trafficking ring, right, it's no joke. It's no joke. If they have actually, if they are prosecuted and found guilty of these crimes, then the book should be thrown at them. These are evil, vile individuals if they are convicted of these particular crimes, of which there seems to be an abundance of evidence. But the city of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis City Council is going to exacerbate issues like this when it comes to their decriminalization of bathhouses. Oh, it's not going to happen for a long time, guys. No, you're just going to open up the door for more of this type of corruption. Just wait. It runs completely counter to the concern that people have in the middle of prosecutions like this sex trafficking ring. We're going to get back to more of your thoughts here in just a moment, because while you have all of this news about new fraud here in Minnesota, what are the leaders here in Minnesota more concerned about? They're more concerned and focused on continuing to try to exploit Operation Metro Surge. I have an update on that story. Feds went undercover in probe of Minnesota anti-ICE network. I love all of this, by the way. These on-the-street insurrectionists, they needed to be examined. They needed to be identified. These are dangerous individuals encouraged by our leadership to take to the streets to obstruct lawful law enforcement. So I say hat tip to our federal law enforcement officers for posing as anti-deportation activists, infiltrating left-wing meetings, as Homeland Security investigated Antifa-linked networks here in Minnesota. This is exactly what needs to happen, because these are dangerous individuals. So we'll dive into that, and we'll get back to more of your thoughts from the Blaster Line here in just a moment. I want to take a few minutes to remind you to head on over to MINNELEAF.com, MiniLeaf.com. Lots of people have reservations about this growing industry. MiniLeaf is here to better your life. That's it. You go to their website. They have a frequently asked questions page there. You get all your questions answered. All of the products are third-party tested. The results are right there on the website, and they're made with natural ingredients, and that was crucial for me. You know about my health issues here on the show. I've consulted my physicians and the MiniLeaf Night Gummies, right? Absolutely effective in getting me a great night's sleep, preparing me, waking up feeling rejuvenated to come and talk to you Monday through Friday here on the John Justice Show. And because they're all natural, they're completely healthy for me to go and take. And they taste delicious as well, right? Whether it's the night gummies, whether it's the fun gummies, the spooky mini leaf tonics, also delicious flavors with the spooky mini leaf tonics, and a fantastic alternative to your typical alcoholic beverages. The Triple Diamond Pain Cream and so much more is available right now at MiniLeaf.com. So head on over to the website where you'll taste happy at MINNELEAF.com. Again, that's MiniLeaf.com. Go there today. Right now, we're going to go back to the Blaster Line. That's 612-584-4565. A friend of the show, Scott, wants to comment on the Blaine vandals, and this just being some juveniles involved in photocopying these middle fingers and putting it on the Blaine City Council woman. So we have to figure out whether or not he's going to be incredibly excited today or not on our Scott Con level, 1 being the least excited, 5 being the most excited. What do you think, Devin?
I'm feeling a 2.
You're feeling a 2? Oh, okay. You're going with the 2?
Yeah.
I'm going to say 4. I'm going to go with a 4 for Scott this morning. Let's find out.
Good morning, John. Anybody that believes the police story believes in the Easter Bunny as well. Let me guess. These kids have parents who are left of center zealots who put them up to this, or at least have been ranting at their homes about how terrible this woman is. And these kids went out and did something to show that they're on their side and they're part of the cause. What a bunch of garbage. I'm sorry, officers. Let's do a little bit better job of looking into what's really going on. It's because she's a right-of-center politician, and then that makes it okay. So just look the other way. Bogus.
So I say he actually started as a 2, but I think he rises to like a 3.5 in there. He's been doing that as of late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was definitely wrong.
Yeah, his enthusiasm, it kind of ebbs and flows. Thank you for the call and the blast there, Scott. Always, I appreciate it. I'm defaulting. Listen, if Leslie, the city councilwoman, says that it was just juveniles doing something, I trust her. I trust her comments on that. I believe in what she says. I would just be curious if they actually know what the motivation was based off the coverage on this, because I'm with Scott. It seems, very, very suspect to think that this wasn't motivated politically in some way, shape, or form. So hopefully we get an answer to that soon. Let's go back to the Blaster Line, 612-584-4565 here on the John Justice Show.
Hey, John. I think the most insidious part about our state government is that they steal our tax money under the guise of helping the less fortunate. And that's the left, the Democrats. And then they have the audacity, after we've discovered they're stealing, to tax us more under the same guise. And then people vote for them. this is why I think we're lost, and I don't think we can come back. Have a good day.
I absolutely believe that we can come back. And I think the Republican Party, as I mentioned last week, I think the Republican Party is in the best position that they've been in a long time, certainly since the 10 years that I have been covering politics here in Minnesota, to make some significant gains. I really, really do. And I think that's evidenced in the way that the left has been responding, including Amy Klobuchar coming out with her proposed ideas to go and cut healthcare costs. But the question arises of whether or not she can actually go and do that. We'll be talking in a little over a half hour from now. John Phelan, the policy fellow economist here at American Experiment, has a brand new piece up this morning. Klobuchar's health plan would hike taxes and lower no costs, according to John Phelan. So we'll get his take on that coming up at 8:30 this morning. Let's get back to some of your thoughts from the blaster line here on the John Justice Show.
Hey, good morning, John. Where's the money going? Check with, there's a few real estate agents that are making a lot of money as well, selling homes for cash for these people, and then they're turning around and renting it to their people. I have seen plenty of them. There's plenty of them out there. So I think that should be the next step, is check out the real estate agents that are doing a lot of cash jobs.
You know, we're in one of those circumstances where we get better leadership here in Minnesota, and all of these different aspects of society need to be re-examined. The rules need to be looked at, tweaked if necessary during the legislative session. These are all the possibilities, going back to the previous comment, of the ways that we can go and get the state back on track. Whether we're looking at voter vouching rules that should never have been in place, the lack of oversight when it comes to individuals who are committing acts of fraud, not turning a blind eye when there's dramatic increases in Medicaid funding requests coming from service providers. The list goes on and on and on. There are ways to go and tackle all of these problems that we talk about on the show on a daily basis. Everything that's listed in the Wrong Track Minnesota list at americanexperiment.org. There are ways to, through the legislative process and through proper leadership, to address each and every one of these. But again, it's going to require individuals serving in positions of power that actually care about going and tackling the problem. Because right now we have the opposite taking place. We don't have people in positions of power that want to go and tackle the problem because they're exploiting these problems to their own benefit. 612-584-4565. Again, 612-584-4565. I want to dive into this Feds Went Undercover and probe of Minnesota Anti-ICE Network. As we close out this hour, though, let me play for you this audio clip because it aligns with this story here, and it's basically the approach of Democrats right now. The Democrats, for a fairly decent amount of time, have not been able to argue and articulate their issues anymore because the issues that they're focused on are widely unpopular among the American people. So they've had to lie when they're running their campaigns. And even then, these self-avowed Democrat socialists are being open regarding what they would actually do if they get into office. And the left has done such a great job of convincing those within their party that, hey, the further you are from a Republican, a conservative's point of view, the better, which has led to this Democrat socialist and really communist takeover of the Democrat Party. So Speaker Johnson, and during an interview yesterday up on Capitol Hill, had this to say regarding what's happening within the Democrat Party right now.
No one wants to be involved in a sex trafficking.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have the wrong clip labeled here, so I'll have to go and I'll have to go track that down in the next segment. That was 100% on. 100% on me. That was more Scary Moriarty, not Speaker Mike Johnson. I can tell you what he said, though. I have the transcript here. He says, we are now in the middle of an open civil war. You have open Marxists who are winning primaries. They want to abolish the border. They want to abolish all prisons. Take away and assume the means of production. And that means no more private property. He's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. And if these Democrat socialists are not stopped at the ballot box, that's what's coming next. That's what's at stake. We need to have a huge turnout later on this year, especially here in Minnesota, in order to get the state back on track. It's that's just the game. And just one more point on that, and I mentioned it yesterday. Those that continue to be concerned about the voter turnout during the primary, don't be. There's no correlation between primary voter turnout and general election voter turnout. And as we demonstrated on the show, we had a record number of Republicans turning out in these elections. And it was really the Democrats who saw fewer individuals, even though they had more, and they always do, voting on the primary day than Republicans. It was the Republicans who had more people turn out in these elections. That is a positive move forward, and something that, a good takeaway as we move forward towards the general election. All right, let's go ahead and officially usher in the third hour of the show. It is a John Justice Show presented by American Experiment, and you can watch live at Facebook and YouTube at Center of the American Experiments pages, also at MN Think Tank on X, and of course you can listen live on the MixLR app where the podcasts are posted after the show. It's a completely free app available in your app store right now. Once you download it, just search for American Experiment and John Justice, and you'll find both the live stream and the podcast from previous shows and today's show once we wrap up. And those podcasts are available across all the podcast platforms, and the videos are reposted after the show, including Rumble as well, for those that don't go on YouTube. So we made sure to give you an option to go and watch on Rumble. Head on over to AmericanExperiment.org. As we were talking about last hour, you need to check out that Wrong Track Minnesota list of what we are faced with here in Minnesota, the biggest issues that are solvable issues here in Minnesota, and they're all backed up with the facts and figures necessary to basically show our work at American Experiment. Also, while you're there at the website, if you head on over to the John Justice Show page, you can make a donation and get yourself an embroidered John Justice Show hat. There's a pop-up on the homepage. Just click it and go to my page and scroll to the bottom, and you'll find it there. We were talking about fraud in the previous hour, including sex trafficking, also being tied to Medicaid billing fraud here in Minnesota, and several comments have rolled into the blaster line regarding our previous instruction here on the show. 612-584-4565 is the number if you want to let your voice be heard.
Yeah, hi, John. Jay from Lightsville. They were focused on the Medicaid fraud, the $9 to $18 billion, and we are forgetting that we had an $18 billion state surplus. So while focusing on the federal money now, they're not focused on the state money. We should be focused on both of those things right now to really correct the image that we have a 20 to 30 to $40 billion financial issue in this state that needs to be remedied.
Thank you so much for the comment. I appreciate it. For those that want to continue to let your voice be heard on the show, you can do that. John.justice@AmericanExperiment.org, or go and leave us a blast at 612-584-4565, like this friend of the show.
Good morning, John. I'm calling about the person who got their car vandalized with the middle finger. $5 says it was her kid. We already know she has a teenage child who's of driving age in her household because their car was not touched. So $5 is, it was her kid. There's some internal family dispute, and they're not going to air that. Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
I don't know. Listen, without evidence, I'm hard pressed to believe it was something. It was something along those lines. If it turns out to be true, okay, but I have no evidence whatsoever that would have been the case regarding this alleged vandalism. I did get an email that rolled into john.justice@AmericanExperiment.org, and they're talking about something very very similar. So I guess we'll have to wait to see. There are a lot of theories out there, and I guess I opened up the door to theories, didn't I? So I'll wait for official word before I go and entertain any more conspiracy theory accusations over what had happened with the vehicle. But thank you so much for leaving the comments this morning on the Blaster line. Again, 612-584-4565. Speaking of fraud, let's go here to the Blaster line. Share this one with you from a friend of the show.
Good morning, John. I guess I grew up really naive because I thought people were generally good and that the bad people were few and far between. I thought people generally did the right thing. But the more and more I hear about the way Minnesota government works and all the fraud, I realize that that's the norm. And those of us who try to follow the rules and try to do the right thing are maybe not in the majority. And it's maddening as I'm heading to work, and I know that a portion of what I'm earning is going to go towards, the government. They're going to use my money fraudulently or allow it to be used fraudulently. It's infuriating. And the caller who within the last week said something about, Minnesota's always kind of been a haven for criminals. And I think about, the caves and the gangsters who came through St. Paul. It's been going on for a long time, I think. It's just the way it is here.
Thank you for the comments. And you look at who has been in charge here in Minnesota, and when the DFL had the trifecta, and the fact that the last legislative session, even though you had a majority in the House, you still had the DFL with a slight majority in the Senate, which means there wasn't any opportunity to change course during the last legislative session. It was so funny. I had a leftist that tried to challenge me on this. I had posted a comment regarding Amy Klobuchar on a line when she was talking about being a transformative governor and how she was going to do things differently. And I called that into question by saying, okay, but it's her party that's been in charge. So what exactly are you going to change and do differently? And do you not endorse what her party has done here in the state? And somebody tried to push back on me and they go, well, the Democrats didn't have all the power during the last legislative session, to which I responded, which is exactly what I just told you. The amount of devastation that the DFL inflicted upon the state during the trifecta, we're still feeling today. And the last legislative session, the GOP was incapable of really going and enacting any real change because of the power dynamic, even though the GOP had gains during the election leading into the last legislative session. So again, my point rings true. If Amy Klobuchar is going to be this transformational governor, a transformation from what? From what the DFL did? From what Governor Tim Walz is doing? No, it's just lip service. Just like her cost-cutting measures relating to healthcare, which we'll get into coming up in just a moment here on the show. But the point that I wanted to pull from Heather's comments here was we could see over the course of the past 10 years what's happened to the state. There were inklings of it before COVID hit. COVID exacerbated the problem, and then the DFL trifecta just went and exacerbated the issues that we were already facing because of COVID and used it to their advantage, with just their massive spending spree and their lack of concern over the rising evidence of fraud here in Minnesota. All of that is to say that just because we went one direction, there's nothing to say that we can't go back and go the other way. You just need the right leadership in office to go and do the right thing to turn things around. Will it be a slow turn? Absolutely be a slow turn. It was a slow turn to get us to where we are today, and it'll be just the same going the other way. Posing as anti-deportation activists, federal agents infiltrated the left-wing meetings at Minnesota Union Halls as Homeland Security investigated the alleged Antifa-linked network accused of targeting ICE operations. The undercover agents secretly recorded anti-ICE meetings around Minneapolis. They scrutinized union finances for possible domestic terrorist financing. According to the Homeland Security investigators, and this was all posted by the Washington Examiner in a piece that I pulled from Newsmax, The effort was part of Project Whipple Shield, an investigation aimed at tracing the money, the organization behind the activists targeting the federal Whipple building in Minneapolis amid the Trump administration crackdown, according to the Examiner. Listen, this was all so far within the legal purview of what the Trump administration could do, to the point where Attorney General Thief Ellison came out and just said he was concerned about this. Yeah, it's because he knows that the Trump administration had more than likely the legal standing to go and conduct these particular operations, and they were right to go and do so. The left has no exclusivity on calling out the right over the federal government going and using their investigative powers to look into potential criminal activity of on-the-street agitators. The Biden administration did it to Republicans. But of course, we know who they were targeting back then. Right? There's a complete double standard taking place. This was, in my view, completely legitimate for ICE to go and take care of, considering the mounting opposition that they were faced with on a daily basis during Operation Metro Surge. And as we've demonstrated on the show, and as we said back then, if there were no on-the-street agitators, if there were no on-the-street insurrectionists, you probably would not have even heard about what was taking place. Just like you didn't hear about the mass arrests and deportations during the month of July, which hit a record since Trump got in on his second term. You didn't hear about it because there was no controversy. There was no, pushback from people on the streets, garnering news outlets. News outlets didn't bother to go and cover it. They didn't care. And why would they? Why would they? Because it was just as if law enforcement does on a daily basis to go and arrest individuals for other crimes. ICE was out and going and doing the same thing. They weren't disrupting neighborhoods. They weren't tearing up communities. They were just going and conducting their lawful arrest actions. And no one even knew until after July was over and the report was released. Just like in the 4 years of Joe Biden, that there was a record number of individuals that were arrested under Joe Biden's ICE at the time, more than what Trump had done during Operation Metro Surge. But you never hear that talked about by the left or the left-wing media. All right, coming up ahead of my conversation with economist and policy fellow here at American Experiment, John Phelan, I want to go here. A story out of Alpha News. Teachers' unions have become the Democrat Party's laundering machine. I'll give you details on this coming up in just a moment here on the John Justice Show, and some really interesting correlating audio from Democrat candidate James Tallarico that I will share with you as well here on the show. Get your comments into 612-584-4565. In the meantime, I want to remind you that if you've gone through the yo-yo dieting, I've certainly done that. Right, you lose the weight, and you end up putting it back on. You lose the weight, and then you end up putting even more weight back on. You can put an end to all of that today, just like I did with the NutraWave program. It really is an incredible program that Dr. Bob and NutraWave have put together. You can head on over to the website, NutriWave.us. You can get more information, but call NutraWave today because there's limited spots available, but you could pick up an almost $300 value with a free red light therapy session and a truth metabolic session that gives you all of the necessary data to find out just exactly how much weight you should be losing and how much weight you can lose during the course of the program. And remember, you get to eat the food that you want to eat. There's no pills, there's no shots, you just get results. I'm on my second round of the program, and I've lost 26 to 27 pounds, and I feel better than I have felt in years. No joke at all. I mentioned it earlier in the show. Melinda and I were out running errands, and I just took a moment and I stopped and realized just how much easier it was to do my daily routines and daily tasks and going out with my wife and just enjoying life. How much easier it is now when you're not carrying around all that extra weight, and you can keep it off, again, with no shots and no pills. NutraWave, there really is nothing like it, so call today, 952-260-1965. Again, that's 952-260-1965 for NutraWave. Results may vary. NutraWave is not a medical treatment. Consult your physician before starting any weight loss program.
If you would like to support the John Justice Show, become an advertiser. Competitive rates for both personal endorsements and standard ads are available. For more details, email john.justice@americanexperiment.org.
It's John Justice, and after discovering Mini Leaf's night gummies, it's no longer a challenge getting a restful night's sleep. At minileaf.com, you'll see their fantastic line of products like delicious chocolates, pain creams, and fun gummies. But for me, it's Mini Leaf's night gummies with their all-natural ingredients that have been an absolute game changer. You take one right before bed and wake up feeling rejuvenated. Head on over to MINNELEAF.com. That's minileaf.com and get your sleep back on track.
And now, here's commentary on the latest issues facing Minnesotans from the hosts, policy fellows, and guests of American Experiment. For more content, head on over to the center of the AmericanExperiment.org.
We break it down piece by piece again at AmericanExperiment.org. But for example, when the FBI first raided Feeding Your Futures offices, she, that week, was calling for protected status for immigrants from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. When the Department of Justice indicted Amy Bach and 46 others, which was the largest fraud indictment in Minnesota history at the time, she was releasing a statement on resuming full immigrant visa services in Havana. And when Amy Bach was found guilty, she was calling on Trump to reverse the illegal firing of FTC commissioners.
Think about it. Minnesota has always been a low-crime state. But according to the most recent Bureau of Criminal Apprehension data, we are now above the national average when it comes to Part 1 crimes, a category that includes crimes like murder, assault, rape, and carjackings. Think about it. Minnesota is now a high-crime state. Visit highcrimemn.com to learn more. Think About It is brought to you by Center of the American Experiment, Minnesota's think tank.
It's the John Justice Show presented by American Experiment. You can listen at AmericanExperiment.org and check out the articles written by the policy fellows. John Phelan will be joining us coming up in just a few minutes here on the show. I want to go back to the blaster line this morning, 612-584-4565. I always know I'm on the mark when the foes of the show get incredibly confused over the commentary and then have to go and concoct these made up things that they hear in order to try to make a cogent point. This is nothing but a word salad with no substance. That being said, if you're a foe of the show, I do like to give you the opportunity to let your voice be heard as well. For as foolish as it might be, listen to this from Eric in Brainerd, potentially on a voice disguiser.
Hey, morning, Eric from Brainerd. I'm so confused this morning. I thought this election was the election about the fraud, but instead we're going to bring this up in the presidential election. So 2 more years of talking about fraud, wailing and gnashing of the teeth, when everyone knows that Damas and anyone that runs solely on fraud without any actual solutions or, ways to solve our problems is going to lose this election. So,
and again, it's so funny to me because you could be in opposition to the commentary on the show, but also provide a little intellectual integrity and address specifically what, say, in this case, Lisa Damath has said regarding what she would do with fraud. She has plenty of solutions to fraud. She went through every single one of the items on the wrong Minnesota list, including the fraud issue, and laid out all of which she would do as governor to go and tackle the issue of fraud here in Minnesota. But there's no intellectual honesty going on here. I'm sharing this with you because it's ridiculous. I'm sharing this with you because here on the show, I've always taken a stance that if you disagree with what I say, you'll get put to the head of the line. That changes on occasion because often I just get garbage nonsense like this. Right? This idea that because I was talking about the fraud and dealing with the fraud and the ramifications of the fraud down the line, suddenly this means that this election isn't about fraud. It's going to be the presidential election. This issue of fraud is going to be going on for a long, long time. And the point that I was trying to make is when we go and tackle the fraud, and if we stop the fraud on a large enough level, we could potentially see unintended consequences like what is being said regarding the stopping of the USAID funds. And suddenly now certain sectors that may have been attached to that funding have now fundamentally changed in the midst of not receiving the funding that they might have been getting from USAID, fraudulently taken from the taxpayers, artificially propping up different left-wing TV and streaming outlets. The fact that you don't see as many funded on-the-street protests over the summer that you typically do. There's a number of different examples pointing to that. That's what I was talking about. Intellectual honesty and pushing back on the show and debating what it is that I'm talking about is one thing. But acting ignorant or just not paying close enough attention. I mean, go ahead, waste your time. I'll play your comments for everybody to hear because you just sound like a fool.
Wondering why we're going to be talking about this for the next couple of years when the price of gas has shot up 30 cents and we're still in the Iran war, which is Trump's Vietnam, a.k.a. your Vietnam. Can't believe we lost it. Can't believe we entered it. Have a great day, everyone.
They're just stuck on stupid. You want to have a conversation about what's going on with Iran? Go for it. You want to have a conversation about the gas prices tied to what's going on with Iran? Go for it. I'm not happy about it either, but I also respect what it is the president is attempting to do with that. So is it too much to ask for a little bit of intellectual honesty when it comes to the folks of the show leaving comments? I don't think it is, but I'm also sitting here not holding my breath here on the show because the last thing I think anybody wants to watch is me pass out live on camera. I don't know. Maybe some of the foes of the shows do, but Moms for Liberty CEO Tina Descovich claims that teachers' unions like the NEA and the AFT misuse dues to push a political agenda instead of addressing failing education. She argues that unions prioritize divisive issues over education, citing resolutions on gender ideologies and support for abolishing ICE. Descovich advocates for federal oversight, supporting a bill to repeal the NEA's congressional charter, and criticizes the union's political donations to Democrats. There's some really interesting points to be made in this story from Alpha News. The Department of Education's 2025 National Assessment of Educational Progress revealed that a record 32% of high schoolers cannot read proficiently. Almost half cannot do basic math. This is one of the items on the Wrong Track Minnesota list available at AmericanExperiment.org. 4th and 8th grade math and reading scores also fell, continuing a collapse that began before the COVID-19 school closures. Teachers' unions are the reason public education is failing in America, Descovich said, adding that they focus on everything but education. Listen, it's confirmation of what we already knew that was going on within our education system, right? They're trying to divide the children from their families, and they are actively trying to turn them into radical activists at an age before they can form their own political opinions, Descovich stated. For example, she noted that one resolution that was advanced and approved by a union was to keep secrets from parents when it comes to gender ideologies. You know, these are issues like this where I remember when they first came up, we would talk about them and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. And there would be some addressing of the issue at the ground level. And then on a long enough, over a long enough period of time, it suddenly just became commonplace to where Democrats would go and argue that it's good and that we should be keeping this information from parents, as if parents didn't have the total authority over their children. No, that happened within the schools. Ultimately, the government, that's their belief. Other resolutions supported teachers who refused to tell children when children want to change their name or pronouns, which bathroom they use, which sexual orientation they claim, and other sensitive information parents need to know about their own kids. They're just evil groomers. That's it. That's the best way to go and describe these vile individuals. According to Descovich, unions take hundreds of millions of dollars out of hardworking teachers' pockets, and yet those same teachers don't even know that this is what they're doing with their funding. Teachers' unions are legally allowed to donate to political candidates across the country, and while individual teachers may be Democrats or Republicans, Descovich says 99% of their political donations go to Democrats. They don't agree with their hard-earned money going to support Democrat candidates that are diametrically opposed to what they believe in and what they value, but teachers feel forced to pay their dues to the unions, she explained, adding that teachers are coerced into intimidated into joining a union and paying the dues. And what's happened here is this turnover of teachers, good quality teachers, who simply want to go and teach the basics to children, but yet don't want to see their money go to what I'm just laying out here, and they've left. And they've been replaced by the radical leftists. Those individuals who are more concerned, more focused on indoctrinating the students than they are providing them a quality education, which is evident in the lack of a quality education that students are getting here in Minnesota. Representative Mark Harris, a member of the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, introduced a bill in July to repeal the NEA's congressional charter. The bill was co-sponsored by Senator Marsha Blackburn, Republican out of Tennessee. Since the NEA is clearly not prioritizing students and parents or even teachers, it's time to remove the Congress seal of approval from this rogue organization. This is one of the things that I wish Trump would have done, and I guess there's still time, but we need just a top to bottom redo of the education system here in America. It should be a focus. Deskovich stated that while the effort is a step in the right direction, it faces a long row ahead. So that's a step one. However, the legislation has yet to be voted on by the committee. She concluded that money talks in Washington, especially when it comes to unions, Democrats are never going to go against what the teachers' unions want because they are funded by them, she continued, saying that the situation ends up being a money laundering scheme for political corruption. I wanted to include this clip from Texas Democrat James Tallarico talking about school choice. Right? Helps kids from lower income households leave failing schools. Listen to what he has to say, what he equates, right? School choice to in this clip.
And then I led the fight against this private school voucher bill, which has its roots in school segregation. Mm-hmm. The first voucher bill was proposed in Texas in 1957, which was just a few years after Brown v. Board. Right. And it was a deliberate attempt to allow white parents to take their kids out of newly integrated public schools and send their kids to white-only private schools. Right. And so I fought tooth and nail to prevent that voucher bill from passing because it would hurt our students, but it would particularly hurt our black students across the state because we know that public education is underfunded in Texas.
No accounting whatsoever to the dramatic decrease in the quality of education in these schools. That's the motivating factor for parents, regardless of the skin color of the students or themselves, to remove their kids from those schools. Absolutely. No, there is no consideration to that whatsoever, and I'm not surprised of this coming from James Tallarico by any stretch. 612-584-4565. Let's get back to some of your thoughts here on the John Justice Show, courtesy of the Blaster line. And again, if you want to email john.justice@americanexperiment.org.
When government doesn't stick to a budget, they have to print more money. That money that's printed is inflation. It's money that should not be circulating, and it's making your dollar worth less. So when you complain and say, "Ooh, who cares about fraud?" Well, every time that money gets printed and the government doesn't stay in the budget and more fraud is committed and nothing's done about it, more money's printed that gets circulated to profit whatever agenda that the government has, and you are getting stuck holding the bag. So for people like Eric and Brainerd, you got to exercise just a little bit more common sense and focus in on things that we could all agree on are a problem.
Yeah, I completely agree. And as I mentioned before, I wish that we would get some quality commentary and some intellectual honesty coming from some of the foes of the show. Let's get back to some more of your thoughts on the Blaster line this morning.
Hey, this is for Eric and Brainerd. When he mocks the fraud, I don't understand why he would mock what's happened in our state. They're literally stealing money from your pocket, Eric. Don't you care about that? I just don't understand the level of stupidity in the left brain. I just don't get it. That's a huge issue. We need to clean it up. Every time I write my tax bill, my tax payment out, I get more and more angry that it's not going where it should go, Eric.
But they don't care. And Eric and Brainerd on the Voice Disguiser doesn't care. They only care about winning elections. That's it. Getting to the truth, seeking the truth. And that was evidenced in the original comment that he made regarding Lisa Damuth not offering up any solutions to fraud. I mean, Amy Klobuchar is in the same thing, and we'll talk with John Phelan in just a moment, not about the fraud issue, but about her plans when it comes to lowering healthcare costs and whether or not she can actually go and do that. But all the candidates are putting up their own ideas as to how they want to go and tackle the issues that are laid out, as I've mentioned, in AmericanExperiment.org, courtesy of the Wrong Track Minnesota. So talk about which issues that you want to discuss and the solutions being proposed by the candidates. But instead, what do you get? You just get they're not offering up any solutions. That's just not true from anybody, regardless of which aisle that they're on. Let's go back to another comment from the Blaster line this morning here on the John Justice Show, presented by American Experiment.
Hey, good morning, John. Paul here. So I think there's a couple reasons you probably didn't see all the protests about deportations in July. Well, number one, it was way too hot. Go out and protest on the streets. Remember, it was too cold. They had to go inside. Plus, hard to get people to protest when they want to go to the lake, go to the cabin, things like that. So, yeah, I think weather affected that. Also, it's probably the Democrats realize it's not exactly as popular as they think it is.
There you go. And we talked about this tomorrow. Thank you for the comment. First off, I don't really buy into the weather argument. There were plenty of the on-the-street insurrectionists that were more than happy to go out in the freezing cold temperatures during Operation Metro Surge. And so the heat that we were experiencing, I mean, maybe on those smoky days, I'd give it to you. But it's also not as politically expedient right now for the left to be encouraging individuals to go out and get in the way of ICE and their continued deportation efforts as we get closer to the general election coming up in November. But I definitely appreciate your leaving a comment, and we'll get to some more of those before we wrap up the show this morning. And as we get ready to invite and welcome our guest onto the show, I just want to mention that the fall briefing with Byron York, you can get tickets for now, the Battle for Congress, an insider's look at the midterm elections. It's happening on September 19th, and if you want more details, head on over to AmericanExperiment.org to get more details about how you can attend the 2026 fall briefing with Byron York. Again, a Battle for Congress, and insiders look at the midterm elections. With that, I'm very pleased to welcome into the center of the American Experiment studios this morning, sitting comfy on the soda, economist and policy fellow here at American Experiment, John Phelan. Good morning, John. Thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Thanks for having me on.
So just real quick, let's back up a little bit for those that are unfamiliar with a bit of your background. You and I have a chance to speak a few times in the previous iteration of the show, but how long have you been here with American Experiment, and what brought you here to the center?
Well, I'm coming up, I'm past 9 years, so I'm coming up on 10 years here now. And I'm here for the same reason lots of people come to Minnesota. My wife's from here. Yeah, I'm originally from England, and I, lived there for most of my life. And 10 years ago, moved over here. And at that time, if you've asked me, what you know about Minnesota, when I first started talking to my wife, I said to my dad, I'm talking to this girl from Minnesota, and he listed everything he knew about the state, which was Lutherans and Hubert Humphrey. And I said, well, they elected Jesse Ventura governor, the guy from Predator. And that's all we knew. Minnesota's reputation has changed a lot in 10 years.
You and I will have to have a conversation outside of the show on your musical taste, because most of the bands that I love come from England and the Manchester area. So this is a conversation you and I will have to have at some point in time, because I'm wondering if there's any sort of crossover with your musical taste versus mine, since the majority of my bands came from England. So
possibly the only interesting thing that I could say about that is that many years ago, I dated a girl who went to school with the daughter of the lead singer of Joy Division.
Okay. All right.
So
I'm already impressed. We don't even need to have a discussion now. That was enough to sort of satisfy my my curiosity. Before we get into some of your recent articles, and I do want to talk about one that we didn't mention prior to our discussion, and it was the 2023 trifecta blew so much money so fast the state government couldn't keep track. I really feel like we should add this to the list of the Wrong Track Minnesota items that are currently available on the website, because that's a pretty big one. Before we get to that, though, I know you were traveling. There was a couple of moments when I wanted to invite you on the show, but you were traveling recently. Where did you go to again? There was a funny anecdote you shared yesterday that I was hoping you'd repeat on the show. But where were you visiting over the course of the past week?
Well, there's an organization called the American Institute of Economic Research, and they're based in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. And I'm doing some work on kind of economic growth at the state. It's not the most interesting, perhaps, to the lay audience, but it's, you construct measures of physical capital per worker, per state, and then you look to try and identify state government policies that can drive that, increase physical capital growth. And I got invited out to AIER in Great Barrington to present on that, do a kind of seminar and get feedback on it. It was really, really helpful. A project that was kind of a little bit stalled has now got kind of a new lease of life. It's a very prestigious organization. It's really flattering to be brought out there. And I was invited to apply, and I think it speaks well of the center's reputation amongst kind of peer organizations. We do have a very, very high reputation amongst them.
Were you seeing or were you hearing any sort of commonalities with what other states are dealing with compared to what we've been dealing with here in Minnesota? Did you have any conversations regarding, what other economists were looking at in their particular region, and were there any sort of comparisons to what's happening here?
Well, the things, it's interesting, I think, with America, it's such a regional country, and I'm not sure Americans quite understand that about themselves. You travel to New England and it's very different. A few things that struck me. One is that there were wall-to-wall political ads on the TV, and this was for the areas New York and Massachusetts and Connecticut. And every ad was, Democrat for Congress, Democrat for Senate, Democrat for the House, Democrat, Democrat, Democrat. And then you come to Minnesota and every ad for a Democrat, none of them tell you they're Democrats. Right. So there's obviously a perception here amongst the Democrats that putting Democrat on is not a good thing. So that's one thing that really kind of struck me about that. Another thing as well, and this goes back to something that Michelle Tafoya has been getting some heat for, saying that you when you go out of America, when you get out of Minnesota, you're afraid to say that you're ashamed to say that you're from there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. I when I was up there, I was talking to somebody from New Hampshire. And then I spoke to somebody from Massachusetts and somebody from somewhere else, and they're all like, Minnesota, like I said just earlier, the reputation of the state is not Lutherans and Hubert Humphrey anymore. And I had a similar thing. I was at an academic conference in Chicago in March, and the audience was entirely academics from different parts of the US. Most of them actually were not Americans. And so I sat there and I presented my paper, talk about it was human capital measurements, it was. And at the end of it, someone says to me, one of the academics says, do you think that some of the results in your paper come from the fact that you're from Minnesota? And then she does it, and this isn't an exact thing, and I can't just quote, I have to do the face as well. She goes, because Minnesota is kind of like that. And this is somebody, she teaches at a university, I think it was in Alabama. And she's Indian herself. And like I say, this notion that people have of us when you go out around the country, it's very, very different to what it was.
Well, and there's no desire from the current leadership to change any of that. It's like they lean into that controversy. You're absolutely right, though. There was yesterday, one of the other it was Bill. It was Bill Walsh. I was talking with Bill Walsh, and he snapped a photograph of somebody who. Have you seen the wooden sign photograph?
No.
Okay, so he was traveling, and I believe it was just outside state lines. And somebody had taken a wooden sign and they had burned on very nicely a message saying, "Yeah, I would leave that state too." So it was somebody in Wisconsin with the sign as you were traveling out of the state. I used to joke as we talk with John Phelan here from Center of the American Experiment when I was doing. Well, a couple of things based off of what you said. One, you're absolutely right about the country being regional. Having worked in different states, I can tell you that the mentality on certain issues is just dramatically different. It used to be when I was in southern Arizona that it was a much different view of, say, illegal immigration there than it was anywhere else when I would go and travel around the country doing different talk radio rows in different states. They had just a complete disconnect from the illegal immigration issue. Of course, that's not the case anymore because of how widespread it is. But I remember when I was doing radio in Arizona, I would joke, I wonder what it would be like to be a conservative talk radio show host in San Francisco. It wasn't Minnesota, it was San Francisco, because that's where all the stories were coming out of. Well, now I know. Now I know because I do radio here, and I have for the past 10 years here in Minnesota, what it would have been like. So it was not that way for the longest time. It wasn't when you started here, and it wasn't when I started here almost 10 years ago. I'm curious on that, and we'll get to these stories as we talk with John Phelan. But you've obviously watched the transition over the course of the past 10 years in terms of our economy and just examining what's been taking place. And I'm just curious, just a general question, having that length of time covering the economy here in Minnesota, is there anything that sort of immediately sticks out in your mind when I talk about the 10 years that you've been here and what you've noticed in the changes of what we've dealt with here in the state?
I think the big thing is that you have a very common idea. It's common amongst, perhaps one political tradition, that there is no limit to the amount of money that the government should be spending and should be taking from its citizens, and that the government should just provide an ever lengthening list of goodies paid for by somebody else. And we have this ludicrous notion that politics is this kind of emboldening, enhancing, uplifting process. Politics is what we do together or something like that. And actually politics is just a hustle. It's just a shakedown. And all you see is it's just one group of people trying to get another group of people to pay for their stuff. There's nothing really noble about that. This is not Lincoln at Gettysburg. This is not, Solon in Athens. This is just a shakedown. It's just people trying to grab money off each other. And it's kind of grubby and depressing.
And I don't see, and I hate to be, I hate to be so doom laden in this comment, but I also don't see that changing anytime soon. I mean, when you have the leadership that we have that's had this mentality that you just laid out for a long enough period of time, in order to have that change, you need new leadership coming up from behind that's going to have a wholesale change in attitude. And there may be individuals that feel that it shouldn't be this way, but it certainly doesn't seem to be the crop of the younger generations now coming up through the ranks, of politics. It seems as if more of the same, if not even worse, if you go and bring in sort of the Democrat socialist agenda and the Democrat Party, because I agree with you. And the sad part is, I think this is kind of just the way it's going to be, at least for the foreseeable future. Do you see it the same way, John?
To a degree, but at the end of the day, there are laws of economics, and the laws of economics will be pursued with the doggedness of Inspector Javert and the merciless brutality of Harry Callahan. And ultimately, if you look at the federal government is borrowing $2 trillion a year. It's going to borrow, according to the Congressional Budget Office, $2 trillion every year from now on, out to as far as the forecasts go. I think the national federal debt just passed 100% of national income for the first time since World War II. And this is apparently while the economy is growing. This can't continue. If you look now, federal treasury yields are up above 5%. I think the 30-year or the 10-year, I can't remember which, just hit the highest level of yield since 2007 yesterday. Now, you can't pay those interest rates on the debt we have without something going very, very wrong. So this idea that, money is just going to come flying at us, whether it's the form of entitlement payments or anything else, it's, the rubber's meeting the road. This is the crisis that the Tea Partiers and the Paul Ryan people and the Ron Paul people from 2012 and 2008 were warning us about.
Were they ahead of the curve?
Yes. And look at poor old Paul Ryan. I mean, he was the last sensible policy guy at the federal level talking about the federal debt. And now that guy can't hang his hat anywhere in America.
Well, it's almost as if, it seems like what you're saying is, and, let me know whether or not you think this is true or not. It seems almost as if there's more of a reason for a full force move towards what the Tea Party movement was now than there was back when it initially started, going back to 2008, right? And I think that's when when the whole thing erupted. It seems like there's more justification for it now is the word that I was looking for. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and it's absolutely bizarre that back then, I can't remember exactly what federal debt was then, maybe let's say 50% of GDP. And the debt was this huge issue. Whereas now it's 100% and we're borrowing $2 trillion a year and nobody cares.
Right.
If you watch the presidential election debates, the last cycle, Trump, Biden, Trump, Harris, there was almost no discussion of the federal debt, almost no discussion of deficits. It's possibly the biggest issue in American politics, and nobody talks about it. Nobody thinks about it. Instead, we just have endless new prescriptions for spending. It's terrible.
Well, and it mirrors, unfortunately, it mirrors a lot of what we cover in terms of just the local issues here in Minnesota, where if there isn't an outrage over it, a lot of times, egregious issues just go There's no accountability. There's no coverage on it. If there's no voices speaking up to go and call out a particular infraction, for lack of a better way to describe it, then that just is able to continue. And it's something very similar happening at the federal level. Like, I wonder if the chorus were to begin to grow loud regarding the national debt, if it's something that, President Donald Trump would want to go and address, and he simply doesn't, because like you said, no one's talking about it. I'm not trying to give the president a free pass. I'm just extrapolating on the fact that you're right. Nobody is talking about this issue, and it's not an issue because no one's talking about it.
Yeah. The president is not a fiscal conservative. There's nothing in his record as a politician or as a businessman that suggests that. And so if you have to think to yourself, what is it that's going to make people worry about this?
Right.
It's going to be, in 2032, the Social Security Trust Fund runs out of money. And you're looking at an automatic, this is as the law stands. Nothing changes for this to happen. This is as the law currently stands. You're looking at, I think, something like in Minnesota, a $500 a month cut to Social Security checks on average. It's about a quarter, I think. So it's huge. Now that's going to happen. The law has to change for that not to happen. And the only way that doesn't happen is, there's a few things. You can massively hike the payroll tax, the Social Security payroll tax, but you're going to stamp on the economy if you do that. You can massively cut payments. People aren't going to like that because seniors vote. You can tiddle about, so one popular thing is raise the cap. So you at the moment you pay Social Security contributions up to 11, then you don't, and they want to remove that cap. What people often miss when they talk about that is that the payouts are capped as well. So if you're going to move the cap on the contributions, you're also going to move the cap on the payments. And the issue you've got there is people always talk in the terms of, well, it's my money, I want it back. But if it's your money, don't talk about raising the cap. If you want to blow the top off the cap, you're admitting that what you want is someone else to pay for the promises you made yourself. So we've got a huge problem there in terms of entitlements, and it will only get serious when that happens in 2032, possibly before that, because when the federal treasury yield goes up, that drags up interest rates across the country. You look at mortgage rates, look at credit card rates, look at car finance rates. All of these things are going to get dragged up because the cost of financing the federal debt goes up. So you're going to see a period of higher interest rates, tighter credit, squeezed living standards. That might be something that brings the pitchforks out again.
So what you're saying is, a policy fellow here at American Experiment, John Phelan, that when I go to look at retirement, I should automatically just start deducting about $500, $1,000 a month from what what myself and my wife should end up getting back in our Social Security retirement.
I'm not a financial investment guy, should say that. But look, if you can't pay for something, you can't pay for something.
Yeah. Of what we've been discussing, and then we'll dive into, and I'll kind of let you choose your own adventure. I want to touch upon all of these here in the time that we have left, but in what you do here at American Experiment and with everything that we've been talking about this morning, what are you most focused on or concerned about? They're two different things, but what is it that John Phelan is looking at as thinking, this is something that is of tremendous concern or focus for me? Is this something you already mentioned, or is it something else?
Well, at the state level, I think it's actually the budget deficit. The state government has spent more money than it's collected in every year since 2024. It's forecast to do that every year to 2029. And the only reason it's not forecast to do it after 2029 is because the forecasts stop in 2029. So basically we're looking at red ink as far out as the eye can see. And that's a big problem because, this is not the federal government. We can't borrow the money. We can't have the Federal Reserve print the money. The money has to come from taxes or spending cuts. So it's a real question of which path Minnesota is going to take. Are we going to keep on hiking taxes, which are already some of the highest in America, even on your average earning Minnesotan? Minnesota doesn't just tax the rich heavily. We tax everybody heavily here, apart from a section at the very bottom, which I could talk about at some length. But even the average Minnesotan is already very heavily taxed. And the only way that all these extra, that this red ink gets covered by tax hikes is if we hike taxes even further on the middle class. And that's the great myth of all this current, tax and spend thing, is that there's three guys somewhere, and if we just tax them hard,
right,
they'll pay for everything, which it's crazy. It's not true. The model is always Sweden, for example. You know, people, oh, Sweden's a socialist country. Sweden's not a socialist country. Sweden's a very free market country, has a lower rate of corporate income tax than we do, has no minimum wage. And what Sweden does do is it has a sales tax. So Sweden does tax and spend more as a share of its national income, but it does it because it clobbers the middle class hard with the sales tax. So if people want Swedish spending, they need to have Swedish taxes, and they'll never go for that, which is why we persist in this myth that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos are going to pay for everything. So I think the deficit is the big thing that I would focus on at Minnesota, because it really is a question of which way this state goes. Do we keep on, higher taxes, higher spending all the time, pushing people out the state? Or do we think, look, enough is enough. Everyone else has got to live within their means. The state government should too.
How much does, just a quick question on Sweden, because I've heard this argument before, and I think I've even, mentioned it on the show. Population size of a region like Sweden. How much does that play into what you're mentioning? Because I've heard pushback on that when people go look at their policies and think, well, this is a much smaller country. They don't have as many people as we do, so it's not really applicable to what we're dealing with here in the United States. You have any thoughts on that?
I don't agree. I think as long as the kind of demographic profile is broadly similar, which I think it is, then it doesn't. The size doesn't really matter, because it's the per capita numbers that are important, I think.
Let's touch upon the 2023 trifecta. Blew so much money so fast the state government couldn't keep track. This falls in line quite a bit with what you were just mentioning. Correct? Is there anything else you want to mention regarding this piece and what you uncovered in this article?
Yeah, I mean, there's this business that got, I think it was $1.5 million out of this $100 million Promise Act fund. If you go back to 2023, the state government had an $18.5 billion budget surplus, the Democrat trifecta, and they were going to spend every last penny of this and more. And they did. They blew through the whole lot. And so this is a situation that we're kind of dealing with now. All these spending commitments that we undertook back then, and the revenue's just not there, because all that surplus was COVID era funny money from the federal government. One-off payments that we should never have assumed ongoing commitments on the basis of. And the Promise Act was one of these things. Businesses could come and apply for grants from the state government, and they had to meet various reporting requirements. One business was identified which hadn't met these reporting requirements. And even if you look at the money it's received and divide it by the number of jobs created, it's something like, is it 250, or it's a huge number of hundreds of thousands of dollars per job created. And it's essentially a bit of a boondoggle, but what it was is this business didn't meet reporting requirements. And it turns out, there's a story from last night on KSTP, that it turns out maybe there's a bunch of other Promise Act recipients that didn't meet these reporting requirements. So again, money just flying out the door. And one of the things that really struck me in the KSTP coverage of this first business is that they spoke to somebody at Deed who said, back in 2023, we were spending so much money that we didn't have the staff to keep track of it. And this ties with what I saw myself when I was up at the Capitol during that period. I sat in committee hearings and I told the story, the State and Local Government Finance Committee, right? So it's the committee that's charged with overseeing state and local government finances.
Right.
Now, the Paid Family Medical Leave Act sailed through its fifth committee hearing in that committee without a fiscal note, without any estimate of what the fiscal cost of this would be. Now, remember, State and Local Government Finance Committee, and it passed that committee without a fiscal note. And the reason it did that is because as a committee chair, Democrat Rep. Ginny Cleavorn said, we're overwhelmed. There is so much legislation, so much spending going on that we can't possibly wait for fiscal notes for all this. Oh. And so if you want to know why we've got this huge amount of red ink bearing down on us like blood out of that elevator in The Shining, or if you want to know why, we've got guys in East Africa driving around in taxpayer-funded cars and living in taxpayer-funded apartments, this is part of the reason. The fact that the whole point under the trifecta was spend as much as quickly as possible and damn the consequences.
How much of what you just described plays into, you have another piece recently up at AmericanExperiment.org as we talk with policy fellow John Phelan. Property taxes are surging again, hammering affordability. It's time for Minnesotans to say taxed enough already. I mean, how much of what you just mentioned is, in this article plays into what you were just talking about via the DFL trifecta?
It's a good amount, actually, because people like to say, well, local governments, not state governments, a different thing. Well, there's a thing called unfunded mandates. And what these unfunded mandates are, and it's like kind of seasonal unemployment insurance, paid family medical leave is another big one. So it's when the state government passes a law that says local governments must do X, but the state government doesn't give those local governments the money to do it. So local governments have to go out and finance this commitment somebody's given them themselves. And so you see this across Minnesota now, these unfunded mandates. They are pushing up, and I feel sorry, I've got problems with local government when it comes to the property tax thing. But to some extent, I have sympathy with them as well, because you've got these politicians in St. Paul swanning around saying, oh, hey, look at all the cool stuff we did. Look at all the cool freebies we've given you. And there's some poor man or woman out in some county office somewhere thinking, I've got to pay for this now.
Yep.
How am I going to admit? And so they have to put your property taxes up. And paid family medical leave is a great example of that. All these people patting themselves on the back at the Capitol, they're not the ones who have to pay for this. Somebody else, somewhere else has to figure that out. And that's one of the things that's pushing up people's property taxes. That's how the state government and the 2023 trifecta in particular is behind so much of this big hike in property taxes that's going on across the state.
Before we wrap on the initial reason why I invited you on the show, and that is Amy Klobuchar and her health plan regarding taxes and potentially lowering costs. Let me ask you this, just based off of our conversation about the economy, and I've really enjoyed this, and thank you for the time this morning. Again, talking with John Phelan, because I had some comments this morning to the Blaster line asking the same thing on a host of other issues. Can we turn this around if there was a wholesale changeover in leadership that came in with a different mentality, one say more aligned with you? Or let's just say, hypothetically speaking, you end up being in charge for some reason, and you're put into a position of government where you can make some decisions. How quickly would it be to, for lack of a better way to describe it, right the ship? Is this something that can be done over the course of years? Or are we looking at a decades-long effort to get things back on track here in Minnesota?
I think you need a couple of sessions, so something like 4 years to kind of get things back on a firm footing. And that's, it's a heavy lift because there's so much that's kind of baked in now. But it's doable. This is a great state. Sometimes you sound like you dunk on the place all the time. I moved 4,000 miles to live here, and I think it's a wonderful place, and it's full of wonderful people, wonderful places. It's got a wonderful history. Sports teams, I'd say less about that. But it's a great place, and because we do this because you want it to keep being a great place, right? And so you have to believe it can be saved. Otherwise, you might as well just pack up and move to somewhere else.
Yeah, and a lot of people have. But I echo your sentiments. I went through an undesirable situation and landed in a much better situation here at Center of the American Experiment. But the larger takeaway is that my wife and I, with our kids, who'll be out of the house soon enough, but are still living with us. We've still decided to go and stay here for all the reasons that you said. And I think the state can be saved, and it's a state worth saving. Is Senator Amy Klobuchar going to be the person to do that? So with that, I saw the same headline that you did, which is why I wanted to bring you in this morning, because it wasn't the Minnesota Reformer had it talking about her tax cutting, her health plan that she wants to hike taxes and lower no costs. I also saw this up on a couple of different outlets as well. So Amy Klobuchar's idea, what is it, and can she actually do this if she were elected as governor?
Well, some background on this is that we've got a problem with healthcare spending. It's across America.
Sure.
It's happening in Minnesota as well. And you've got these subsidies which are set to expire or are expiring. And apparently the expiration of these subsidies is a crisis of the first economic order, we're told. Now, these subsidies, the long story of these subsidies is that the Affordable Care Act, it became very obvious very quickly it was not going to provide affordable care. So these subsidies were voted in. So people could use these subsidies that will help them buy healthcare policies in the marketplace. The Inflation Reduction Act in 2021, so these subsidies are not that old. They're 5 years old. These subsidies under the Inflation Reduction Act were expanded, and eligibility was expanded. So people on much higher incomes were now eligible for these subsidies as well. Just as a quick thing, the inflation, just as the same, as the Affordable Care Act did not provide affordable care. The Inflation Reduction Act did not reduce inflation. So if ever you want to know what these congressional bills do, look at what they say they do and think of the opposite.
Okay.
So the Inflation Reduction
Duly
Act,
noted.
the Inflation Reduction Act massively expanded these credits to include all sorts of people on higher incomes, which had never been covered before. When these subsidies were put in place, these tax credits, they were voted for specifically, and you can look at the legislation, to expire in 2025. It was understood these were temporary expansions, and that was voted for by Senator Amy Klobuchar and Senator Tina Smith. Not one single Republican voted for that bill that established these subsidies with an expiration date of 2025. So when Senator Klobuchar now says, "Oh, it's terrible that these tax credits are going to expire," that's what you voted for back in 2021. Specifically, it's right there in the bill you voted for. And so the plan now is that if these federal tax credits expire, these federal subsidies, that we will enact some kind of state version. The problem is, and I wrote in the article, I think perhaps Senator Klobuchar has been in DC too long. When she went to DC in 2007, the federal budget deficit was something like $9 trillion. It's now up over $37 trillion. And she seems to have the mindset that we can just throw money at this problem and not really worry about where it comes from, because the Treasury will finance it with borrowing, or the Federal Reserve will finance it with money printing. When you're in the state government, you can't do that. And she needs to learn that quick, because you have to balance the budget. So if you're going to start throwing all this money at tax credits, you've got to find that money somewhere.
Yeah.
Where's it going to come from? The Reporter article, which is actually very good, says that she's going to find it with efficiency savings. You know, I mean, if government can be massively more efficient, why not just do that now? Right?
Right.
I mean, I'm always being told by politicians, we're going to pay for all this new stuff. We don't need to raise your taxes, but just be more efficient. Just be more efficient.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so
what's stopping you?
Exactly. And I think government is inefficient. I don't think that's because it's run particularly badly. I think it's just the nature of the beast. So I'm very, very skeptical that you will generate very much in terms of efficiency savings. I think it's kind of, it's a bit like the magic money tree. In the same way, and in fairness, the way people on the right very often say, we're going to cut everyone's taxes, we won't cut spending because economic growth will take off. Maybe. All right. I'm actually a bit of a fan of static scoring. And I think we've got to stop appealing to these money trees. You've got to balance a state budget. It's not like the federal budget. You've got to balance the state budget. And so when we talk about these tax credits, you're talking about tax hikes. Simple as that.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when you start throwing money at these issues, you're not lowering the cost. You're not lowering the price. You're just transferring that cost to the taxpayer. So that's why I wrote that Senator Klobuchar's plan, it will lower no costs. It will lower no prices. All it will do is transfer those costs to the Minnesota taxpayer and hike their taxes.
Do you think they're just banking on the fact that there won't be a lot of opposition to? You mentioned the Minnesota Reformer article did a decent job of sort of covering this. I mean, did they go so far as to what you said? And if she's proposing this, I mean, do you think she's just banking on not getting a lot of pushback on it? Or in speculation territory, but I'm curious your thoughts.
I think I think the Reformer went about as far as it reasonably could. I think it was a good piece. But I think to some extent, and I see people on social media, DFL aligned people saying, oh, Amy Klobuchar's released another plan. She's released another plan that shows how, serious a candidate she is. I mean, look, if plans won wars, Hitler would have captured London in 1940, right? Having a plan having a plan doesn't mean it's a good plan. And this plan, Amy Klobuchar can now point to this health plan and say, hey, look, I've got a plan, but it's rubbish. I mean, it's nonsense. It's just a tax hike. And I don't know that maybe she will get away with that because the state's media is how it is. And you've seen that the last couple of years that Minnesota Democrats like Tim Walz, Ken Martin, who have been promoted to the national level have kind of flamed out because they don't have that firewall of media protection anymore. And so the Minnesota model is not really reproducible at the national level. And I think if you look at Amy Klobuchar, she's coming the other way. So maybe it will work a bit for her. I don't know. I mean, the local media, there are still questions that Keith Ellison has about pardoning a child rapist,
right?
Which, as far as I can see, the local media have not followed up on. Now, that issue is just kind of, it's all gone now. Yesterday's news. But of course, it's yesterday's news if you stop reporting it.
Well, and with Amy Klobuchar, too, you're absolutely right. It's kind of an interesting dynamic. And I completely agree with you when you've seen those individuals get elevated to the national stage. As you mentioned, you're right. They flame out. What's interesting about Amy Klobuchar, too, is I think there's also, while she is heading the other direction, she's also hasn't done a lot publicly, and now she's going to have to. And in my view, she doesn't play very well, on the, in the interviews, up on stage. So we'll see how she actually ends up doing, because I think she also has her own difficulties based on the fact that, she's made herself a bit sparse when it comes to media coverage. And now she's not going to be able to do that. She was up until the primary, but now we're into the general. We're all going to have to endure her commentary and her ideas, poor or not. So John Phelan, policy fellow here at American Experiment. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for coming in early. I encourage everybody to head on over to AmericanExperiment.org and check out John's writings. Anything you'd like to say before I cut you loose and let you get to work this morning?
Just that I've enjoyed being on here enormously. I think it's wonderful having you here. It's a real strength to the organization. And I look forward to doing this again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words. And again, thanks for coming on this morning.
Thank you.
All right. Listen, that wraps up the show for this morning. If you missed any portion of today's broadcast, you can check out the podcast. That'll be available shortly, as Devin will get to work on it as soon as we conclude things today. It'll be up on the MixLR app, also across all the major podcast platforms. And you can do a rewatch of the show live on Facebook and YouTube at Center of the American Experiment, and also my personal Facebook pages as well. Remember, head on over to AmericanExperiment.org. Support the John Justice Show. You can make a donation, get an embroidered John Justice Show hat. We also have logoed mugs available on the merchandise site, and more merchandise coming very, very soon for the show that I'm really excited about. So I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. If you want to reach out between now and tomorrow morning, you can do so. john.justice@AmericanExperiment.org, or you can leave a blast overnight. 612-584-4565, 612-584-4565. And to everybody who's left comments in the middle of my conversation with John Phelan, be listening tomorrow morning starting at 6 a.m. We'll play some of those back and do a bit of a recap of our discussion. So be sure you're listening in early tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. God bless, and I'll talk to you guys on Wednesday morning. Bye.
Static waves at dawn, a voice that lingers when night is gone. Twin cities hum with stories spun. John Justice rides the rising sun.